I call the Board of Selectmen's meeting for October 4th, 2021 to order. We are going to start tonight's meeting in executive session, and we will return to open session no later than 6:30 PM. Mary, can I get a motion?
I move that we go into executive session to discuss two items. First is pursuant to General Law, Chapter 30A, Section 21A2, to conduct strategy sessions in preparation for negotiations with non-union personnel, or to conduct collective bargaining sessions or contract negotiations with non-union personnel. Second, to review status of litigation involving the town and strategy with respect thereto. The chair has determined that discussion of litigation matters in open session may have a detrimental effect on the litigation position of the town. The following cases will be discussed. Collins et al. Versus Orsini and the Town of Harwich Zoning Board of Appeals et al. Cuddy trustee versus Harwich Planning Board. Cuddy trustee versus Town of Harwich et al. Ember Pizza Inc. and Port Restaurant 3137 LLC et al. Versus Town of Harwich et al. Ember Pizza Inc. et al. Versus Town of Harwich et al. Ember Pizza Inc. et al. Versus Town of Harwich and ABCC. Hall's Path Enforcement. Gomes versus Chief of the Harwich Police Department. Jones versus Harwich Board of Health and Town of Harwich. King and James Kelly versus Harwich Conservation Commission. King and Kelly versus Walter Diggs et al. And the Harwich Conservation Commission. McCourt et al. Versus Town of Harwich Planning Board of Appeals et al. Novak versus Town of Harwich Conservation Commission. Rago et al. Versus Harwich Zoning Board of Appeals. Stevens Wequasit Trust versus Harwich Conservation Commission. Walsh Brothers Building Company, Inc. et al. Versus Harwich Conservation Commission and Town of Harwich. Watkins et al. Versus Town of Harwich et al. Winston and Plunkett versus the Planning Board and the Royal Apartments LLC et al. Wise versus Harwich Planning Board. Eldridge et al. Versus Town of Harwich et al. Donald V. Holt III versus David Gilmet, Harwich Police Chief. Freitas Jr. versus Harwich Board of Selectmen. Viprino versus Chief of Police. And last but not least, Viprino versus Town of Harwich.
Second. Can you read that second line again?
Moved and seconded to go into executive session as read. Roll call vote. Don?
Aye.
Mary?
Aye.
Julie?
Aye.
Larry?
Aye.
And I am an aye. We're going to evening. I'm going to call the Board of Selectmen's meeting for October 4th, 2021 back to order. We started tonight's executive session in executive session at 5:30 and adjourned at 6:30. Returning to open session now at 6:33. In tonight's executive session, there was two items. To conduct strategy sessions in preparation for non-union negotiations, contract negotiations. We did not take that up. We ran out of time. We're gonna hold that off until next week. And then we had a review of status of litigation. If you've read the agenda, you'll see there's a whole laundry list of litigation that the town's involved in, so we're getting an update from town council on that. Please join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
To the flag
of the
United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you.
Should have brought my winter coat.
Public comments and announcements? Joe, are you going to do the first one?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. Three quick public announcements. First, directly to the board and then indirectly to the general public. But as you may know, Cape Cod Regional Vocational Technical High School has their brand-new building, and they're having an official ribbon-cutting ceremony this Friday, October 8th, in the morning. However, I'm unable to attend because I'm working on things related to town meeting, so I wanted the board to be aware of that if anyone from the board can be present. And Cindy Williams can provide more information if anyone from the board is interested in attending that event. For the general public, we were pleased to announce that there are going to be two resident flu clinics that will be occurring in this month of October. They are October 13th and October 18th. Both sessions are 1 p.m. to 3 p.m. at the community center. It is a drive-through with residents staying in their car getting vaccinated, and more information can be found on the town's website about those two events for the flu clinics. And then last but not least, we've been made aware that there is going to be, I think for the first time in 2 years, an in-person Veterans Day ceremony occurring on Veterans Day, Thursday, November 11th, 2021 at 11 a.m., and that is to occur at the Island Pond Cemetery. So we're at least able to congregate again to remember our veterans on that important day. Those are my announcements, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Joe. Don?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Joe, if I would, you had another announcement that it's going to be a joint meeting out at the Marceline property on Thursday with the Board of Selectmen, the Housing Trust, and the CPC. Get to walk the property.
So, thank you. The clarification would be that it's an off-site visit for those boards. It has not been posted as a public meeting, which is allowed under the open meeting law for those boards to walk the property. There'll be no deliberation, but yes, very much looking forward to that. And thank you for correcting my oversight.
Thank you. Anyone else for public comment and announcement? Moving on to the consent agenda.
I move that we vote to approve a Caleb Chase request in the amount of $565.21.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Next up, under old business, there's two items related tonight to a 40B. And I've asked that our attorney, Amy Questle from KP Law, join us tonight. And she's going to start with giving us a presentation on 40Bs, local initiative programs.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the Board of Selectmen. This is in regard to a 40B, as the chairman explained, a 40B, which is being presented as a local initiative project. And what that means is that the applicant is asking that the town go in on the application for the 40B with the developer. The reasons for a LIP application are that DHCD will provide some technical support. It's usually a project that is of interest to the town as a whole. It's usually in an area that is sufficient for the type of structures that are being built. So for example, if you had a project and you don't, but if you had, an old factory in a downtown area and they were going, somebody was going to reuse the factory or something like that, where the town wanted the area to be revitalized, et cetera. So normally those are the type of LIP projects that we see. The benefit of a LIP as opposed to a standard 40B, the benefit to the town is that I recommend that a town does not enter into a LIP unless they have a memorandum of agreement or a memorandum of understanding with certain factors. So for example, if the applicant is offering to do some road work to improve proposed traffic impacts, if there's any kind of sewer or nitrogen loading issues, that there would be a memorandum of understanding between the town and the developer. That would be signed, and there would be a list of mitigation that the developer has promised to do. They then go to the Zoning Board of Appeals, say they get a comprehensive permit with conditions. They can always come back to the Zoning Board of Appeals for an insubstantial or even a substantial change, and have some of these conditions wiped away or changed. But with an MOA, they cannot. That MOA stands on its own. And so it's an added layer of protection for the town. We obviously cannot require this for every 40B because an applicant has the right to, file for a project eligibility letter with Mass Housing, and then they have the right to then file, once they receive a PEL, which is the project eligibility letter. Sometimes I use all these acronyms and I forget that I don't explain them. And so once they get a PEL from Mass Housing, they can just apply to the Zoning Board of Appeals. Here, if you have an applicant asking that you go in on the application with them and support the project, we can then say, well, we'd like an MOA out of this, which is, definitely what I would suggest. So the other aspect of the LIP is the fact that DHCD will provide technical support to both the town and the developer. It's my experience that the technical support is really more along the lines of they'll provide the regulatory agreements, things like that, which they generally do anyway, because they don't really budge on their regulatory agreements. They're all the same. So, I'm not really sure what kind of assistance. The one that I just didn't seem like we got much assistance from DHCD. So what happens is that the developer will propose this project before the Board of Selectmen. And what I would suggest is prior to making any decision on a LIP, you receive background. So you receive qualifications and past projects from the developer, particularly developments that were built under 40B, any litigation that any past or present litigation that the developer is involved in regarding 40Bs. And then you want to have a list of references, obviously, the development team. That stuff usually is provided, the development team and their credentials are usually provided in the application. Sometimes there's qualifications of past projects, but not always. You want to have the address of the project, the description, which includes the amount of units and the amount of bedrooms. So it's important with regard to nitrogen loading and wastewater, it's important to know the number of bedrooms. And there, just a reminder, under 40B, there has to be a certain percent of 3-bedroom units. And those have to be dispersed amongst the project equally. And they have to be dispersed by both location in the project and also by income tier, affordability, affordable market, et cetera. Conceptual design drawings are always good. And then it's always good to know the percentage of the land that's being occupied by buildings and paved areas. Often what happens with any 40B is the property is substandard for a development of that size. So they could not build what they want to build on that property, so they're gonna come in under a 40B where certain requirements can be waived. So almost all 40Bs that I deal with have wetland issues on the property, and that's the reason why. And then an initial list of waivers is important, so we know exactly what they're trying to get waived from, like the zoning bylaw, setbacks, height, things like that are very important. The height is very important too, from a public safety standpoint. We have to make sure that the fire department can service a building a certain height. And then there should be, with a LIP, in my opinion, there should be clear benefits to the community. And, benefits would include an innovative site design, a percentage of affordable units that are in excess of the mandatory, perhaps, a building density that doesn't actually maximize the site. Smart density rather than let's just build whatever, as much as we possibly can. A location that's in harmony with the needs of the community. Architecture, which blends in with the immediate neighborhood. And then, provisions for enhancing the property, meaning landscaping, drainage, things like that. Even connecting some drainage from, neighboring developments or neighboring, properties to try and cure any drainage issues that already exist on those. And then the ability to meet other town housing needs, such as senior housing, workforce housing, rental housing, things like that. And then we always want them to be, energy efficient, leads, all of that stuff. We want it all to be top of the, with the times, I guess I would say. They have to be energy efficient. So the process for a LIP is that the developer has to submit, they have to contact DHCD before they submit any LIP application, but they have to come to you guys first. They have to present, they have to make their case that this project is a good project for the town to, endorse and be a partnership with. And then it has to be signed by the municipality. Then it's submitted to DHCD and Mass Housing by the developer with the fee, and the developer pays the fee. The town does not. The project is it then becomes essentially a standard 40B. So once Mass Housing gets it, they go through everything, and when they're satisfied that there's site control, that there's financials, et cetera, they send it back to the town for a 30-day review where the town administrator's office will send it out to boards, committees, department, seeking comments on this project. There'll be a site visit with Mass Housing. And then an appraisal is commissioned by DHCD, and then the application, the PEL letter has to be, the project eligibility letter has to be issued by Mass Housing, and then they could file with the Zoning Board of Appeals. So with regard to the front end of all of this, where they're before you, and they are, they're talking about, what their project is about, what their project can do for the community, et cetera. I urge the town to keep the Zoning Board of Appeals out of that. The Zoning Board of Appeals should be insulated from all of this because they're essentially going to be issuing or denying a comprehensive permit for the project. So the whole project will come before them. They're not missing anything. They're not missing any, any information, but they really shouldn't be part of the front end of it. So that's pretty much it.
Thank you, Amy. I'll open it up to questions from the board, and I'll start with Larry.
I think good description, and I liked your email description as well. I think I'm just going to continue on because you've laid out some parameters that we develop on getting the MOA up front. And what are the limitations on that? Could we, whatever what we agree to or what we decide, for instance, could we increase the number of affordable housing units? Is that, are there certain restrictions on what can go into that?
So the MOA is a private contract between this board and, as the town, and the developer. So with any private contract, you can negotiate certain things. So you can negotiate, if the town is in desperate need of affordable housing, you can ask for 2 extra affordable units. The parameters that I try and keep in the MOA is anything that will be impacted by the development. So we wouldn't want to put the development, in the far eastern side of town and then have them do a rotary on the far western side of town. If there's traffic concerns, we want traffic mitigation that's associated with the project. And that, again, so that would go, affordable housing, that's town-wide.
Yeah.
So I think that could be asked for. The other thing is that the MOA can restrict the number of bedrooms.
Okay.
And that's very common in most of my MOAs. It has to do with, we're concerned about nitrogen loading, so it will restrict the number of bedrooms, which again will then ultimately restrict the number of units.
Okay.
And then the second thing is the traffic mitigation. We just did one where they're reconstructing an intersection, things like that. Luckily, it's town roads. When we get into state routes, we have a little bit more difficulty because we have DOT involved, and developers can't guarantee that they'll be able to do something because they have to get approval from DOT.
Okay. Thank you, Amy.
Yep.
Julie?
So, on a similar note, in terms, oh, yeah, I don't have we're sharing, I guess. On a similar note, affordable, I know, is, we have leeway there in terms of going back. In terms of workforce, though, where there's no true definition in the state, do we have any eligibility there to push back and ask for a certain number of affordable, certain number of workforce?
Well, I actually, again, it's a private contract between two parties, and I think you could. There is an example of workforce housing in Provincetown at the development called the Barracks that was supposed to be built on Shank Painter Road, which is a combination of dormitory and studio apartments, and then one-bedroom apartments. So it was a really innovative project. Unfortunately, it's being appealed, but it's still, and that was considered workforce housing. So that was both. It had workforce housing, plus it had units, and then it had studios, which were considered units.
And as you said, we have the ability to ask for certain traffic type of mitigation, but also, aesthetically, in terms of fitting into the neighborhood, we have
Screening.
leeway in, screening and even height.
Yep.
Right? Yeah, so, no, I think you've done a great job at telling us what we can overall ask for, and I think we have a lot of questions on that.
Thank you. Mary?
Larry basically asked my question, but one further on that. Would it be possible to put in that memorandum agreement more restrictions that it be Harwich people, either born here, no longer living, want to come back, living here, working here? A cry I hear is we want it for Harwich people. Is that something that could go in that?
So the local preference is something that, in my opinion, DHCD flip-flops on quite often. And so it would be something we would have to check with DHCD before we did that. I know that Mass Housing takes the position that local preference could be in violation of federal fair housing, and therefore, if the developer has any federal funds that they're getting, any kind of federal loans or anything, that could impact the financing of the project. And so, I do have a condition that I put in my 40B decisions that basically says that the lottery there shall be a preference for local residents, provided it doesn't impact developers' financing or, violate the federal fair housing, things like that. So it's in there, but,
Thank you.
All set?
Yep, all set.
Don?
I'm all set.
I'm all set for now as
Okay.
well. Thank you very
Thank
much,
you.
Amy.
Thank you, Amy.
You gonna stick around for the next part?
sure.
Attorney Singer, if you'd like to join us at the table with whoever you'd like to start with and announce your team.
Do we have things on the screen? Otherwise, we'll put up some boards.
We weren't prepared for it.
The boards are fine.
Okay.
Just give us one moment, we'll get those set up.
Andrew, if you'd like, in the start anyway, if you want to introduce your
I
team
can
that you
do
have
that.
with you.
Absolutely. Good evening. For the record, my name is Andrew Singer, attorney on behalf of the applicant. With us in the audience are Peter Donovan and Gary Terry. They can raise their hands. They're property owners. Also Brian Bush and Jeffrey Bush, who are the developer partners. We're here. Kurt Raber, who you can't see, is the project designer architect behind the board there. Randy Hart is with us, who's the traffic engineer. John O'Reilly, the site engineer, wastewater, et cetera, was not able to be with us tonight. Mark O'Hagan, who is the economic consultant for the property, was also not able to be here tonight. But that is the full team. And actually, I can start. I'd be happy to start, Mr. Chair, as appreciate the comments that town council just made. As you know, this is our second session with you. Well, welcome. It's your first session with you. We had submitted a significant amount of information with the first hearing a few months ago and some supplemental information last week for tonight. Happy to say that I think we answered or provided virtually everything the town council was suggesting you look at, and I will go through some of that. I'd like to focus on really three things, and based on what town council had noted, which is compliance, waivers, and need. And when we met with you last time, there was questions and concerns regarding different aspects of the proposal. Obviously, as a 40B, it is conceptual at this stage, although we have provided you, as you saw with everything you have, pretty in-depth, well-developed plans, both showing perspective views from Sisson Road, and two of them are up on the top there now, as well as architectural elevations and site engineered plans. I did provide you and I have extra copies if anyone needs it, a project benefits list from last week, and I wanted to go over, and I think it's important, per town council's suggestion, what is complying with this project and what needs waivers. I've done more than a dozen 40Bs, and in this project, we need basically, and this might be refined a little bit, but basically we need 2 waivers. And in my experience, that is incredibly low. You usually need many waivers. Now, for a 40B, you're always going to need a waiver for density. I mean, that's the nature of 40B. We wouldn't be here if it wasn't a density question, so that is one. But I would like to comment on where this project, for the number of units, and again, as town council noted, we have provided you with the number of units, the number of bedrooms, and other information regarding the layout of the affordable units, the disbursement of the 1, 2, and 3 bedrooms throughout the property, and we've provided all of that to you for the public record. We gave that to you at the last session we had with you. This project, as shown on the plans, and Kurt, do you have the site layout? If we could put that up as well. What you're gonna see on the plan, and what you have seen on the plan, right there, that complies with all Harwich dimensional setbacks, front, side, and rear. It complies with the Harwich building coverage requirements. It complies with the Harwich site coverage requirements. It will comply with all stormwater regulations, with all lighting regulations, with all mass DEP discharge requirements in the Saquatucket estuary. It will comply with there's a recorded deed restriction, and now it's off to the south of south of the plan. It was on the aerial before. There is a there's a deed restriction on a piece of property to the south east of that, and that is going to be honored and complied with as well. We have been continuing to work, and will continue to work through the Board of Appeals process with, as I said, complying with all DEP requirements. We're going to provide a crosswalk and a crosswalk across Sisson Road and a bus stop along Sisson Road at the site driveway, as shown. We did submit a preliminary traffic count analysis to you. It's not a full traffic study. That'll come during the ZBA process, but this rental community will generate 46 weekday morning peak trips and 57 weekday evening peak trips. This is not going to be an overly significant generator of traffic there. Is it more than what's there today? Absolutely. That's something that we'll be looking at as questions are raised. The project will also comply with the MISA Natural Heritage restriction that is on the property, or, as I stated to you before, we will seek, and we have been in contact with MISA, an amendment to the existing approval. Right now, the project, which was for 7 homes on larger lots, has approval to disturb X amount of the land. I can't remember the exact numbers, but X amount of the land. If you've been out to the site, only Y amount of that has been cleared, and as part of the road construction and everything. So there is more land in the unrestricted part of the property that can be cleared, and there is land in the restricted part of the property that is not supposed to be cleared. As we discussed, or as was raised at the last meeting, a couple corners of the buildings are across one of those lines, so we will, and we are, discussing with MISA about the ability to rearrange where the open space is, because not all of the land that can be cleared has been cleared. There's enough land that can be amended to allow that to happen. And if MISA says no, then the project can be shifted in its design, because there is a significant amount of land available for the development. As far as compliance, the property is approved for, and this gets to another comment that town council made, or a suggestion that you look at. The property is approved for 7 homes with 28 or so number of bedrooms. There is no requirement under local law, town municipal law, for any treatment of nitrogen. And so what's proposed with this development on this property, which has to go through the DEP, therefore it is subject to the DEP requirements, is proposing a advanced system that will actually treat to nitrogen and be less impactful to the environment than if this project goes away and 7 houses are built on the property. So exactly to town council's comment, this proposal from an environmental point of view, and we've submitted the information to you, will be actually better for the environment than what the town allows and has permitted by right. So I think that's an important consideration as well for the, as you consider this. And again, it goes without reason, but I'll say it again, since we are not here before you as part of a public hearing at this point. As council noted, we submitted a request to you with a draft application, which is part of the LIP process, asking you to review it and to consider supporting the concept of this proposal that we got before you. And that's why we're here before you tonight.
Andrew, if I could stop you for 1 minute?
Please.
Before we get too lost, I'm gonna let board members ask questions on where we are right now,
Sure.
and I'll start. So, the traffic study.
Mm-hmm.
46, you said 46 cars?
46 weekday morning peak trips and 57 weekday evening peak trips.
And
So that's in the morning peak hour and the evening peak hour.
Can someone explain that to me out of what we were projecting to be roughly 150 cars, I believe?
Someone can, but I'll be the person who's gonna sit here because I
I
can't.
thought so.
Well, good evening. I'm Randy Hart from BHB. I'm a principal in the firm, and I apologize, I cannot take my mask off. My firm mandates that I wear it throughout the meeting.
Quite all right, just speak as loud as you can.
I will do my best. If you can't hear me, just say the word. So, yes, we did do some projections, preliminary projections for the project, and the numbers that Andrew cited are the numbers for the peak hour conditions. So that's 1 hour between 7 and 9 a.m. and 1 hour between 4 and 6 p.m. Okay, so it's just that one critical peak hour. It's sort of during that period of time when the combination of traffic that's already on the street today, coupled with the traffic that we generate, will be at its most critical level. So that's the key period for review for a residential project of this nature. And, you know, the numbers are the numbers. They come from the IT manual, which basically draws data from similar type projects in the area plus across the country. So it's real data that was collected in the field and is used to apply to a project that's being considered.
So I guess my question is, if we got 150 or 100, I can't, Andy, maybe you can correct me, 168? How many cars?
96
Units.
units with 144 bedrooms?
So 1.5 cars per unit, I think, was the calculation that we were given.
Yes, I believe yes.
So
one and a
out of
half.
155 cars, why between 7 and 9 when people are going to work or going to get breakfast or whatever? Why is it only that low amount of cars?
So it's not between 7 and 9, it's the hour, the 60-minute period between 7 and 9 that's most critical. So, and that changes based on where you are, what's on the street. So it's that 1 hour, it's not 2 hours worth of data. And you know, it makes sense, it really does, because if there's 96 units and, you know, that 1 hour is only going to accommodate certain people. I mean, people leave at 5 a.m. in the morning, leave at 6 a.m., they leave at 7 or 6:30, 7:30 to go to work. So it's distributed. The commute to work is distributed between 5 a.m. and 9 o'clock, generally speaking. The commute home is distributed again between 3:30 or 4 to 6 o'clock as well. So you wouldn't expect them all to be in one place at that critical period. But we want that 1 hour in the morning, that 1 hour in the afternoon, where we know the most impact will be. That's what we analyze. That's what we look at to see if mitigation is necessary for the project, and if it is, what do we need to do?
Okay, thank you.
Michael?
Go ahead,
Can I
Larry.
follow up with that, Michael? What I was missing in your report was context, namely, what's the traffic there now? What % increase is this?
Yeah, so again, we're very preliminary at this point. We will be doing a very detailed traffic study that meets the local requirements, that also meets Mass DOT requirements. We have not done that to date. However, we did do some very preliminary peak hour counts in the summer condition, which we didn't include in the analysis because we had heard, or I had heard from Andrew, that some numbers were being thrown around at the last meeting in terms of what the project would generate. So we wanted to come in and make sure you knew what the accurate numbers really are, at least at the beginning of the project. But we will be looking at the volumes of, that's on the street today versus what we're doing, and we will do a complete and detailed traffic impact and access study to really identify the impacts of the project and if there are any needs that we need to deal with in terms of mitigation or improvements.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Follow up on the traffic.
Yeah, it's traffic.
Go ahead.
So, in looking at the numbers, when I look at Saturday, tell me if I'm reading this correctly, but I see on Saturday, you've got 391 enter and exit for a total of 781. Am I reading that correctly?
Glasses are fogging, excuse me. Yeah, I mean, the daily numbers are in that range, as we said right on the first page of the memo. I mean, we provide the weekday because it's the more critical. Saturday is obviously, we're on Cape Cod, so it's critical as well. So as part of the work we will do, when we do the full traffic study, is not only analyze the weekday, but the Saturday as well, knowing where we are. We will also analyze peak summer conditions because that's all that matters, right? If it doesn't work if it works in the summer, it's certainly going to work in the other periods of the year. So we will look at both. That's the common practice for Cape work.
So I would just comment on, in terms of that, we have the summer traffic, and then we also have the location of the property behind the fire and police station. So I think we need to consider that as well. So just while we stay on the traffic.
No, I have no questions at this point.
Don? My second question was related to nitrogen, and I appreciate your experts not here on that tonight. It's my understanding that 7-lot subdivision, that's an expired subdivision plan, and that they will have to come back in and reapply for that. Am I wrong?
It's not our understanding. No, it's
Not an expired, so you're
No.
set to go for the 7 homes with no nitrogen removal at all?
Yes, and in fact, it was perked, or it's scheduled to be perked. It perked a couple weeks ago, so in anticipation of pulling sewage disposal construction works permit. So it's all valid and ready to go as far as we know and understand from the town.
Thank you. Any questions, unrelated to where he's at so far, Larry?
Yes, if I may, Andrew, when you describe the development layout and the property itself,
Yes.
you mentioned MISA and you mentioned the deed restriction. Could you show me on the map where parcel P2 is? Because that seems to be the one that is deed restricted. Is that P2? If I read it right, there's a P2, there's a P overall big one, and there's a chunk that's labeled P2. That seems to be the one that the deed is written on, and that has all the restrictions. Is that clearly outside of the development? It's the corner where you're pointing at.
Yeah, well, what I can show you, Kurt's, so this area right here is land that was deeded to the town for open space when the subdivision was
Right.
approved. And this is the remainder of the land. The deed restriction lot, and this, for anyone in the audience, I know Mr. Doan is here, and it's his property, is approximately this.
Right, that's what I'm calling P2 in your
Oh, okay,
diagram.
it's B1.
B1.
B1, I'm sorry, yeah, B1 that's lot B.
B1, I'm sorry, I can't read my,
All right, Mike?
it's B1, Andrew, I can't read my own notes.
Okay, yeah, so this is B1, and that is the area where there is the old pump house, and I was gonna discuss that, but,
If you would, Andrew, just show everyone in the audience that map real quick. Just flip it around and hold your finger on the deed restricted piece that we're talking about.
Because my question is that clearly out,
this is B1, give or take. Again, very rough.
that was a question that's come up before, is that clearly outside of the development, so those deed restrictions are intact?
Yeah, well, just to be clear, the other than, and I'll talk about the pump house briefly, but that land is not being touched other than that. However, the MISA, I think,
Other
the
than
MISA is a
what?
little bit other than removing the pump house, which is The owner, Mr. Donovan and Mr. Doan, who's here and his counsel is here, have an agreement. And again, this is outside of your jurisdiction, but it is something that came up last meeting, so I wanted to update you with it anyways, that there's an agreement that an old pump house that's on that property would be removed. There's an agreement that some arborvitaes would be planted along a common property line. The parties met at the site last week. They also met again with Amy Uzowski, the conservation agent, last week on the site, so they met twice out on the site. And all local permits have been granted to remove that pump house. Mr. Doan has asked, Mr. Doan has asked Mr. Donovan if he would also reach out to the Harwich Historical Commission. We don't believe the structure is listed on the inventory, but Mr. Donovan has agreed to reach out to the Historic Commission. A contractor's already lined up to remove the pump house, but they're gonna not do it first. They wanna go talk to the Historical Commission. However, there's a second issue, Larry, that's what I think you're talking about, is MISA. That's separate from MISA. What MISA is saying is if you look at the rest of the land.
No, I understand MISA. I think you have some flexibility there, but
Right.
it appears to me you have no flexibility on the deed restrictions on B1.
Absolutely not, and we're not asking for anything.
And so that's why I wanted to clarify whether that is clear or not.
Oh, absolutely, yeah, no work is being done, no development work as part of this proposal that's on the other plan touches that land.
That's okay, I can't,
So that land is here.
okay,
Yeah, I'm sorry,
that's me.
yeah.
So on that, just following that
Yeah.
trail, if you had to shift it for any reason, you're saying it still wouldn't impact any part of that? or
Correct.
it may?
What this is referring to is that so you see this, what's in the development area there. Okay, there is another plan, and you have it, we submitted it to you. It shows different areas that are considered forever wild or no-build zones. Okay, on that part of the land. That is the part that's subject to MISA. The deed restriction parcel to the southeast is not, we're not
Okay.
talking about that.
Yeah.
So when I say that things could be, if they agree to an amendment, is that forever wild land there could be shifted because there's land that's still wild that hasn't been cleared, although it has permission to be cleared.
Okay,
Yes.
thank you.
Any other questions from the board? Don?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A little bit off point, but it wasn't discussed last time, and it hasn't been discussed at this point either, and I don't expect it will. It's got a road that's already been laid out and.
Built.
I'm not sure what the fill was, but the road is there. I've gone down, and it's quite an elevation. So the first question I have is that going to remain a private road?
It's actually going to be, right now, you have your old planning board hat on, I can
Yep.
tell with the question. So I will answer that. Right now, there is a subdivision, and Chloe's Path is a road layout with those. Part of this proposal would be with the Board of Appeals, although it could also be the Planning Board, but it's probably the Board of Appeals because it's a 40B, is for lack of a better term, a rescission plan that would merge all of that land, not the land that's already been sold to the town, but wouldn't be a rescission plan because some of the, lot 8 is that open space lot that was deeded to the town. So lots 1 through 7, or whatever it is, would be recombined as one lot because you have to have one project. You have to get rid of those lot lines. And Chloe's Path that is there would be Chloe's Path. It would be a site driveway. It wouldn't be a legal road because the road would go away with the combination of the road layout and the lots that are around it. So it would become a site driveway, and so it would not be a road. It could still be called Chloe's Path.
Well, that's exactly where I was going.
Yeah.
So to the extent that this thing winds up occurring as a project, it's built, the full responsibility for maintaining that driveway and plowing that driveway rests with the private developer.
The gentleman sitting in the second row.
But it wasn't said before, that's
Oh,
what I wanted.
okay, yeah, well, yeah, for the record, yes, it becomes a site driveway and it would be part of the management of the property. Along with the bus stop, everything is part of the, yes. Yeah, it gets a little, when you call it a road, a driveway, but yes, that's what it will be, Don.
Okay,
You're
thank you.
correct.
Go ahead.
All right, thank you. So the compliance part, I think, is I've said it. What I'd like to, now the waivers. And those waivers get to, as I noted, density and then height. Those are really the only two that we've identified at this point. Now, density is density, and it is what a 40B is authorizing to do. Now, that being said, as I noted, even though this density is greater than what could be there, it will be better environmentally than what could be there and can be there. It will be complying. It's not like they're over-maximizing building the land for open space. You know, it complies with town requirements for open space, building coverage, site coverage. So those all comply. So yes, the number of units is greater, but I don't believe it is negatively impactful to those issue areas that the town looks at under zoning typically and planning, because it complies. As far as height, excuse me, it is a 3-story building, but there is parking under, sort of at grade under, and so it is not higher. If this was in the RH3 zone, which allows 4 stories and 50 feet, we wouldn't be having this conversation. I tell you, it's complying. It's not in the RH3 zone, so you got the 30-foot height limit, so it is going over that. So how do we deal with that? Because again, it was brought up by town council, you want aesthetic considerations and screening. And so we provided you with perspectives. Because of the grade change and because of the vegetation, thank you. If you are on Sisson Road,
Could you real quick just show that to the public since we don't have it on the screen? Yeah. Thank you.
you have the other one as well, Kurt, from the fire station? Oh, there we go. Yeah, I'll do that first. And these all were public, just for the record, at the last meeting. They're on file. So the top view is if you are standing on Sisson Road, basically at the bus stop, so right there. So that is the view you'll have from Sisson Road, which is virtually nothing. You will see some rooftops in the back. If you come halfway down the driveway, number 2 there, that is when you will see the building. So you are now well onto the property. Obviously, you've already gone behind 3 of the houses that are up on Sisson Road. That'll be the view you see. So you're now starting to see it clearly as you're coming around the corners of the driveway. Do you have the other one? We also did a perspective where you'll actually maybe potentially see it the most is over the fire station property and police station. So the top is the view you would have from Sisson Road. Now, that's a view from Sisson Road if you stop. If you're stopped. If you're driving along, you're not going to see much because you will see roofs again. And this was done at a time, you can see it's relatively sparse. So we didn't give you an image of what it will look like in the summer when it'll actually be filled in more. And again, as part of this 40B process, additional plantings might be able to be done. But just to start off, although we're asking for a height variance, this property is very well screened. And you will not see it, and we flew tests with things. You won't see it from Forest Street. So, and you won't see it from Sisson Road at the property site drive. You will, barely, you saw the image. You will see a bit of it more over the corner of the police station if you're driving north on Sisson Road, particularly or mostly in the off-season. Can you put that other one back up? Thank you. So those are the waivers, and that was something that was raised. So the waivers are density and height. Everything else is complying. And as for the things that you would want to ask the developer for, getting back again to town council's great list, again, I think we've provided virtually all of them. At the last meeting, Mr. Bush talked about his experience. You know who the team is. Project description, the units, the number of bedrooms, the 1, 2s, and 3 bedrooms, the disbursement through, site drawings, architectural elevations, floor plans, coverages, waivers, public safety needs. We met with the town department heads. We've met with the police department, the fire department. We've actually, they had requested on their side, and if you're on that plan, that's the police station, fire station on the left. They requested a fence along the common property, probably on their property would be better, because that's where they have evidence and other training and things that they do in the back. And so again, we're working with them on that. There was a request for police, and Randy made it as well. While there is more than enough site distance and sightline views at the driveway at Sisson Road, additional pruning could be done on some of the vegetation and the layout to improve that. And that was something the police department had raised as well. That's not a problem. That's all very doable. So what I'd like to end with for a few minutes is the need. And I think that's important because when we were here with you the first session, there was a lot of discussion both in front of me and behind me about whether or not there's a need for this type of development in the town of Harwich. And I'd like to discuss that briefly with you. Let me back up. Well, as far as need, we provided a study to you, and which talks about that. And some of the things I'd like to point out, for this property, and town council mentioned that as well about finding the right property. Well, we submit that this is the right property, or is a right property, because of ease of access to grocery, pharmacy, auto services, banking facilities, town hall, the library, the community center, and more. This site is not only within driving, it's within walking distance of virtually all of those. The site is an excellent location relative to regional employment, to healthcare, and to daily consumer services. The affordable units will be regulated by state and federal guidelines. We have no control over that. You have no control over that. It is what it is. We are proposing that 20% of the units would be deed restricted at the 80% AMI threshold. And there was discussion about that, and there was discussion by you, raised questions earlier. But one of the things I'd like, when you talk about workforce housing, and it's a wonderful term, unfortunately it's a term with no definition, so I wanted to try to give you our thinking about that. There is also an urgent need on Cape Cod, and I'm going to go through a little bit of that briefly, for market rate rentals. We need rentals on Cape Cod, not just deed restricted affordable, not just workforce, but market rate as well. And here's the methodology that this applicant is proposing for this site. These units, the market rate units, are designed for income levels between $69,000 and $113,000 of income. So if you, let's say you're in a 2 or 3 bedroom and you have a two-member family earned occupation, those are the types of income levels that are anticipated. We can't speak to what the rents would be. We're too far out. It's 2-3 years away. But these are meant to provide housing for, again, a broad unmet need. Nurses, medical workers, engineers, architects, public safety officials, restaurant managers, library workers. I mean, people who have, you read the papers, people who have good incomes, but in this market on Cape Cod, they are priced out of buying a house, absolutely, and they're also priced out of renting because, frankly, we just don't have rentals. And we don't have moderate density rentals like this. That's an even more limiting factor. And I'd like to read a statement that the CEO of the Housing Assistance Corporation wrote in her editorial in the last Hackbeat, which came out for September. Quote, "There is less than a 1% rental vacancy rate in every town on the Cape, and rental applications often close the same day they are posted due to the volume of inquiries. Our booming real estate market has made purchasing a home close to impossible for the average worker in our region. Median home prices are around $630,000, which means a person or a household would have to make nearly $160,000 in order to qualify for a home loan. It speaks to a larger problem on Cape Cod, the lack of affordable and attainable housing for our region's workforce, families, young professionals, and seniors living on a fixed income. This lack of the right kind of housing drives up prices and drives out locals." Similarly, a new board member of the Community Development Partnership, who is a local, and she and her husband are raising a family, and she's now a new board member on CDP, as I said. And this is, she had a couple provocative ideas for what's needed, but I thought they're important because one of them is directly related to this project for Chloe's Path. Quote, "We need to address this problem of affordable housing now and do things we haven't done before," she says, suggesting that it may be time to take some property out of conservation to create more space for housing, to build apartment buildings, and to cap the number of second homes. Now, some of those, the first and third, are pretty provocative. The one in the middle, build more apartment buildings, that's this project. And submit that, again, it demonstrates the need that is there. finally, along this need issue, if you've read, let me see, there's a gentleman sitting behind me over here who wrote the article that I'm about to quote from in the paper a couple weeks ago. The Secretary of the Executive Office of Housing and Community Development came down to the Cape and came to Harwich, and he met with business owners. And to quote from Mr. Galvin's article, this is Zach Terry of Terry's TV. He said, quote, "Local people can't afford to live here, can't afford the housing, employees are living off Cape." Rick Morris of RPM Carpet and Floor Covering said, "Finding help is the big problem." The secretary himself is quoted as saying, "The biggest concern in the state is housing. We're working on it," he responded. "There are enormous challenges across the state, especially here on Cape Cod." This development is designed to meet the so-called missing middle class. Workforce housing, market rate housing that we need, plus affordable housing. That's what this project is designed to address. As Randy noted with a subsequent in-depth traffic review, there are questions we can't answer tonight. There are things that will come out and will be analyzed and reviewed and conditioned as part of the ZBA process. We believe sincerely that this project will help move momentum on this urgent need of needing rental housing, all kinds of rental housing here on the Cape. We're in a crisis, and the housing advocates that I noted and others have agreed that density is required to make this housing work. You have to have density, and we need a moderately dense development that Chloe's Path is to try to move that needle. Again, it significantly raises Harwich's share of the SHI. That was in the materials we submitted to you the first time as well. We believe that Chloe's Path provides this housing. It provides it in a manner that's going to be aesthetically attractive, environmentally protective, and economically feasible. We appreciate your additional time. We appreciate your consideration. We would like to partner with you, if possible, to move forward on this development. We think it is going to be a win-win-win for the community, the residents, and the owner. And if you have any more questions tonight, we're here, and we'll be happy to answer them. If we can't answer them, I will try to get you the answers.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm going to start with our town administrator, just to see if he has any comments or questions before I move on to the board.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do have some questions based on what Attorney Singer just touched upon a moment ago that I'd like to get into. But also, through you, I would have a question for town council as it may relate to a potential mitigation if it even gets that far. Attorney Singer, you talked about rents, and I thought I heard you say that it wouldn't be possible yet to quantify what they would be. Do you recall what you said? I just want to make sure the basis of my questions are sound.
Well, what I say, we provided you in the first presentation with anticipated rents. What I meant by quantifying is I can't tell you, those were estimated rents now. We can't tell you, just like with the affordable rates, because HUD comes out each year with their guidelines. Sure. 3 years from now, I just don't know what they'll be. Right. That's why I thought but we did provide you some numbers just for frame of reference. The frame of reference with the income ranges that I provided, I believe, is maybe a more, not accurate, but a better way, more full way to look at it.
Okay. If I may, because I have questions regarding the market analysis materials that were provided. And my comments stem from page 11 of the Tracy Cross and Associates residential market analysis, which I think is the one that was dated in April. But it talks about 72 units at market rate, and it talks about an average rent of $2,390 a month for an 858 square foot apartment. And it then identifies the range from 1,255 all the way up to 3,150. But then when it speaks to the benchmark net rents for designated workforce units, the average drops in a very positive way to $1,358 a month, with a minimum of $1,255 and a maximum of $1,735. And I'm just confused why the minimum for the workforce housing would be the same minimum for the benchmark. To me, the 72 units are, for lack of a better phrase, unrestricted, but the workforce housing would have restrictions or qualifications on it, yet they both start at the same base. That doesn't make sense to me.
I'll do one of two things. I'll see if Mr. Bush can address that. If not, we'll get you the answer, but it looks like he can, so I'll ask him to come up.
Mr. Chairman and members, thank you for your time. Joe, would you mind telling me what page that was?
Sure, it's page 11, and it's the last 3 paragraphs under a framework for planning. If you look at the second paragraph under that sentence, under that section, about midway through the second paragraph, it talks about, as outlined in Exhibits 4 and 5, benchmark posted base rents for the 72 market rate units extend from $12.55 to $31.50, and an average of $23.90, these are all dollars, for an 858 square foot apartment. And then later on, the next paragraph talks specifically about the benchmark base rates for workforce housing. And so I'm just confused where the base for both categories starts out at the same. And it's a bad word by me, but I would have assumed that the workforce base rates would be lower.
Yeah, so they reference a couple of exhibits. I'm just gonna try to find those quickly.
Good question, Joe, getting right into the weeds there.
That's what they pay me for. And then, Mr. Chairman, if I may, while we're waiting, a question through you to council.
Absolutely. I'll be right back.
So, Amy, you talked about mitigation, sorry. You talked about mitigation, and in the presentation we just heard, they talked about that this could be a walkable area, and the reality is the town's working on a project of what we call sidewalks from center to center, and that's from the community center through Harwich Center to the, what we refer to as the cultural center. But my understanding is that's where sidewalks generally end, and there is no, and I'm gonna look in the direction of our police chief, if memory serves correctly, we don't have sidewalks on either side that extend from just after the cultural center area down to Route 28. If that is in fact the case and the town wants to go that way, could a mitigation proposal be that the applicant provide funding for sidewalks in that area of town?
Just before she answers, just clarification.
Sure.
There is a sidewalk all the way down to 28.
So which side am I missing then?
On
Because
the
I
far
don't,
side of Sisson Road from our site. Sorry to interrupt, but there, just so you know, it's a good question, but there is a sidewalk there.
so if I can clarify, a sidewalk to me has curbing. And so we see that well-defined in the Sisson area.
It's an older sidewalk.
So if we wanted to impact upon existing sidewalks and make it look like what a wash ashore would call a sidewalk.
Yeah, in my opinion, sidewalks would be good mitigation.
Thank you. And generally in that location, that's
Yes.
accepted. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right, that's it for you, Joe?
Mercifully, yes.
Don?
I'm just trying to clarify what Joe clarified.
Well, Don, would you like, we have an answer.
Yeah,
Happy to go
so
forward unless you'd like
look-
to answer.
Okay.
Relative to the benchmark rents, it's a range that's based on the market statistics that they got from the area. If you look on the exhibit on page 4, I believe. So that's a pretty broad range when you look at benchmark rents. For instance, one-bedroom rents are $12.55 to $21.95.
But if I may, you said page 4? Do you mean?
Exhibit 4, I'm sorry, if you look,
Yep.
it has an exhibit on the top left corner.
It's the page, where is it?
So right after page 11.
Yes.
Right. It gives the ranges on that for the market rent units as a pretty broad number, not a specific number.
Right, no, so I see all that. I'm just wondering where the same arithmetic arrives, because everything I'm looking at on this page, again, goes back to the benchmark, and to me, that's not really in question, because the benchmark talks about the 72 units that are, again, as a civilian here that's never built an apartment complex, is available at what the market will bear.
That's
But what we're talking about really is the 24 units that I think the town has significant interest in.
Which are set by HUD guidelines.
Yeah,
Right,
those
so-
are not part of this.
Again, the confusion still remains, though. Your benchmark, the arithmetic you use for your benchmark for the public units starts at 1255. Why does the affordable start at 1255?
I was gonna take a shot at it.
Yeah, because there's three different things that are in play here, and I'm going to wheel back to what Andrew started with. Workforce housing is a nomenclature that's ill-defined. It's not codified under law. Workforce housing would be the lower end of the market rate rentals. Affordable housing under the state law are the 20-some-odd units that are dictated by the area median income. So you're talking about a subset of the market rents when you're talking about workforce housing, because there really isn't anything under law that's called workforce housing.
So then if I could just as a follow-up, the 24 units, so you've got 96 units, 24 of which are not market rate.
Correct.
Your analysis refers to them as workforce housing. The town has made it very clear that we have a keen interest in what we would call affordable, lowercase a, housing that could impact upon workforce. So I see where the base is coming from of 1255 for what the market will bear and what we may consider more affordable. But the range is far smaller. The market goes all the way up to 3190 and the workforce housing goes up to 1700. But it's that base that I'm worried about. Because if we're talking about a base and it's an 858 square foot apartment, you're starting out at the same level and it's not gonna work for workforce. That's my concern. I may not be articulating it well enough, but it would, something that I would wanna have further discussions on, because that market rate analysis is gonna be critical for the board, I think, in making some determinations going forward. And to me, there just seems to be a disconnect between market rate and workforce housing rate.
Okay, so maybe I'll explain in just a little different,
Because we
viewpoint.
know it's not capital A affordable as to what HUD is going to tell us, and the arithmetic that goes into that changes every October.
right.
That
so-
part I get.
So the range for the affordable housing based on unit sizes that are different. So one-bedroom units might range from 600 square feet to 850 square feet. In our analysis, and because of the market, where the market will bear, there may be people who are attracted to larger one-bedroom units to a unit that has on a higher floor has a view. And that rent would command more money for rent. When the state looks at rent in the 40B process for one-bedroom units in that example, the 600 square foot unit and the 850 square foot unit that are one bedrooms pay the same price. And in order for the state or the parties affected to not be penalized by that, they make the developers have a representative unit across all those unit types so that they're not restricted to just the small units at affordable prices. So if you get the big unit or the small one-bedroom unit, you pay the same price. And they further restrict it so that they have to be interspersed in the building. So you can't just say they're just ground floor units, they're just in the back. They look at the units and they're specified on the plan, they have to be approved by the state, and they have to be interspersed throughout the project. So that's a big difference on how market rate works. It's like saying that a two-bedroom ranch is the same price as a four-bedroom colonial. That's not how the market does it. If someone were to impose that restriction upon you, then and you have to live by it, then you'd live by it or choose not to do it. So it's the mechanism that the state uses to protect affordable housing in this instance. Does that make it any?
It does. I'm still going to end on a statement, though, if I could, and I appreciate that. But truly, for the benefit of this board on behalf of the general public, the board's going to have to rely upon all the materials that you've provided. And so when you look at that page in the market analysis called the Framework for Planning, you've got a voluminous paragraph that talks all about market rate. And when it gets to what I would consider to be one of the most critical aspects for the town, and certainly the board, if they're going to endorse this in some way, They then, as elected officials, need to sell it to Jane and John Q. Public. And we're only given one sentence that describes how you derive or what's anticipated for workforce housing units. In fact, the comparisons that I drew from this, trying to compare the two paragraphs, one which is 7 sentences versus one which is 1 sentence, talks about the minimums and the maximums and the averages, which I think you've explained well. It gives an example of an 858 square foot unit for that average rent for market rate, and it ends by talking about the posted benchmark rent rates yield a dollar value ratio of $2.70 per square foot, and you have that same comparable of $1.61 per square foot, but you don't talk about available rental units. In other words, the average for a market rate is 858 square feet, $2,390 a month. And the average for a workforce housing unit is $1,358 a month. For what unit? For what size? Is it possible to get that level of detail for workforce housing as you have for market rate, so that the board and administration and everybody could talk about the potential benefits? I think there needs to be more substance there that the town could rely upon to make the argument that this proposal could have significant positive workforce housing type units available.
Okay, so just to clarify, you're using the word workforce. That's not, I don't believe, what they define here. They define market rate housing.
So, sorry, third paragraph, page 11, benchmark net rents for the 24 designated workforce units. So I apologize if that's the wrong phrase.
They're called, this is where I think our terms, and this is what happens when you don't have a definition for a term. What we're all calling deed restricted affordable units, this report's calling workforce housing.
So I think
That workforce housing is not the workforce housing that's
Sure.
been discussed.
But I think my request still stands. The town's gonna need better information then, because if I made that mistake and we're reading it with words that we all know, and it's not the same words, you might wanna refresh your market analysis respectfully.
So on that same note, page 10 also talks about doing an expanded market analysis to include Plymouth, Bristol counties focusing on I-495, 195, and Route 3 south of Route 44, because there was not enough information. But I think that we would all collectively agree that that's not the case, right? Anything that is not here, this side of the bridge, and trying to create an analysis, and I understand from a statistical purpose why you would have to do that. But just to play off of that, we do talk about market rate, affordable, and then workforce. The numbers are confusing. Also, we talk about in using and expanding the category to include those areas. We talk about Plymouth having 2,539 price tag on a market rate rent, compared to 1,895 in Barnstable. So the difference per square foot is 243 in Plymouth, 180 per square foot, now this is per this analysis, 180 per square foot in Hyannis. But when you do the numbers on these units, the benchmark posted base rent is $277 per square foot. The other thing is that this says, on page 10, the reason that they expanded the analysis to include this area is because they share commonalities in transportation and employment. And I don't necessarily know that that statement can be made when you're talking about Plymouth, 495, Route 3, 44. Transportation, they have a commuter rail. Cape has a train in the summer. That doesn't even help us. It's only for the weekend crowd. So we do not have the same type of transportation. We certainly don't have the same employment opportunities, Plymouth and that area onward, especially if you were commuting to Boston, right? So then you have to tack on commuting cost to even get to that train from the Cape. So I'm just pointing out that I think that this market analysis, expanding to those areas and treating them as if they're similar to the Cape, are not accurate. They can't be accurate. And I don't know how we go from 2,539 or $243 per square foot there in Plymouth, $1.80 in Barnstable, to, like I said, $277 per square foot. And matter of fact, and I will say, I worked with rental units for quite some time, so I totally appreciate the need. It's desperate. 1, 2, and 3-bedroom units, there's 1 and 2-bedroom units, they're more common around the Cape unless you're renting a house. 3-bedroom units are crucial. In this proposal, there's only 10 3-bedroom units. And if you take the median average income, which, and again, was for Harwich, $83,287 versus Barnstable of $78,583. And if that person making a median wage, right, needed a 3-bedroom apartment at $3,150, I did the income on that, so that's $37,800. That means that somebody making $83,287 is paying 45% of their salary in rent, which is not acceptable. And some of these apartments are beautiful. So market rate, I'm sure that there's a lot of need for some of that. But when we're talking about workforce, which is undefined, and I understand we don't have a correlation legally to define that or what somebody has to make. But the reality is trying to get somebody who's desperately in need of a 3-bedroom apartment paying 45% of their salary isn't gonna work. So that doesn't help our community, and that's what concerns me. So I think the market analysis has lots of information, but it is confusing and conflicting. So I would like to see more local analysis of rents, true salaries, and what's affordable before we could really, weigh in more heavily on this. Otherwise, there's tons of information, it's great information, and the need is desperate. So you won't get me to disagree with that. But I want to be able to, as Joe put it, if I'm asked about why I'm supporting this or why I'm not supporting it, it has to be factual.
Are you saying that you don't think these are facts based on what?
I don't think this market analysis is relative really to this community, is what I'm saying. I'm not saying it's not factual. They specifically call out why they expanded it in the areas they expanded it to, and I understand why. Again, trust me, I worked in rentals for 9 years, so I understand the need, I understand the lack of availability. And there's not a lot of 3-bedroom apartments. Like I said, they'd be a house. If you needed to have 3 bedrooms, 4 bedrooms, you're looking at a house rental. But I still don't think you're gonna see somebody making an average wage of $83,000 being able to rent a house for $3,000 either. So I find that the market analysis is really not prone to this community.
Can I address that?
Brian, let me
Yeah.
have Larry and Mary chime in on the market analysis piece, not go straight to that, and then you'll have all the questions.
Okay,
We'll go from
I
there.
I have no, I'm set.
No, I think Joe and Julie have presented that
They've,
very well.
pressed them pretty hard.
You got anything on the market analysis?
Yeah, I do. It appears to be, it takes up a lot of space, but I'm not sure it says anything. Because once you get past the affordable housing component, how are we actually going to guarantee that step above affordable, that's a subset of market rents? Once it goes out there, by definition, a market rent is market. Whatever the market would bear. What would be that mechanism that we'd say 10 or 15 of these units would be not controlled by area median income for affordable housing under state law, but nonetheless are going to be set aside for workforce? There's no mechanism that I can think of that would accomplish that.
It's not contemplated in our proposal. It's not, they are market rate housing. They're not regulated.
That would be my point. There's only 2 things going on in this analysis. There's a set aside for affordable housing because you're required, and you mentioned 20, it's 25. But there's that's controlled by state law, and there's that which is above that, which isn't controlled by anything other than the market. That's really what you're saying, right? Okay.
But there is also, as I tried to say, Don, as I was reading about it, there is a need for the housing that Brian's talking about, and that we're talking about, the non-24, the 72. There is an urgent need for that type of housing as well. this project can't solve all the problems. And there's a need for deed restricted at different income levels, workforce, market rate. That's all a need on Cape.
But I don't want to delude anybody.
Oh, no.
Day
We're not
one, when this thing gets built, the only thing that's controlled is that 25%, because everything, no matter what your good intentions are, if all of a sudden it became even more of a problem with rentals on the Cape for market rate, these things could go up much more than you're contemplating right now, and there's nothing at all that controls that in this process. Nothing.
No, I'm not disagreeing with you. We're just saying that there's a need for the regular market rate as well.
Right, and I think that the argument goes that because you only have largely one type of housing here, single-family housing on Cape Cod, that the market conditions have put that to a point where it's unaffordable. The first house I built for myself was in Harwich when I was 26 years old, and I built it for a short amount of money. I was underemployed relative to what I was earning and what I might have been able to earn somewhere else, and I had a lot of friends who did that too. They worked as carpenters, as artists and that kind of thing. That's not possible on Cape Cod any longer. And so the idea with this housing is that the market forces are only gonna go up so high for apartments, right? They're not single-family homes. They're not gonna be, a median home price of $500,000 or $600,000. And at the rents that are in this market study, which is a bit of science and a bit of art, and to get to your point, Julie, they expanded to Plymouth because there's no comparable product to look at. There's 600 units in the pipeline in Hyannis for apartments. You got one of the biggest developers in the country coming to Hyannis that wouldn't have come here 10 or 20 years ago because the market wouldn't support it. It supports it now. People commute from New Bedford, Fall River, Plymouth to come here. They commute at all levels, not just low levels. They're high earning people who are shut out of this market. And so if you look at the market demand right now for these apartments as proposed by the market survey that we had done, and this is the market rate housing. I'm not gonna use the word workforce housing. It's market rate. It's gonna go up or down and if it goes down, we lose. If it goes up, we win. That's how the market goes. The low-price one-bedroom market units are affordable to people earning 111% of area median income. The most expensive one-bedroom units are affordable to people making 126% of area median income. The two-bedroom units are affordable to people making 142%, and the most expensive two-bedroom are 153%. The three-bedroom units would be affordable at 147%. The requirement for 3 bedrooms is a state mandate. It didn't used to be that you had to build 3-bedroom units in 40B housing. Now 10% of your housing stock in 40B has to be 3 bedrooms, and that's to encourage families. I don't know how Chatham and Harwich like to be compared to one another. You guys share schools, so I'm gonna throw this out there, but in Mr. Galvin's paper, the town of Chatham is targeting housing affordable at 200% of area median income because it's that bad there. So this project's not gonna be everything to all people. It's not gonna solve all your problems, but between restricted units that are affordable and market rate units that fill a gap that don't exist in your housing stock, it'll give a chance for people to be here who otherwise would not be able to. So I think that's the gist of the project and the market study relative to where those rents are.
Thank you, Brian. Don?
But just to continue, because of something that Julie had said earlier, I want the public to fully understand the scenario. I do, but the public needs to understand the scenario that the numbers that she was throwing out, a bank wouldn't give you a mortgage at that percentage.
I can get this project financed without any problem.
Oh, no. I'm talking about when you get into the mid to high 40s of your salary allocation. That's a deal killer. You're not getting a mortgage at that.
Nobody lives in any, with 2,500 apartment, no one lives in any one of our apartments who has their housing cost is more than 33% of their income.
But by extrapolation, that means that the people you're talking about are not workforce people.
A bunch of them are, yeah. It depends on the market. I mean, there's a market component here. That, you know, I don't want anyone to be disillusioned. There's an affordable component and there's a market component.
And also remember that with the numbers that Julie was mentioning, a 3-bedroom unit, you said they're targeted for families. A number of families are gonna have 2 wage earners. So all of a sudden, that's not 45%. I'm not saying everybody, but
Yeah,
on some of them.
because, you know,
There you go.
you've got even those numbers in here in terms of a, you know, 2-income family and such. And I guess the point is, you know, of course, whatever project there is isn't gonna fix everything. We understand that, you know? And the same token, what I think we as a board are, and I'm not gonna speak for the board, but in terms of trying to convey also that we do have a lot of people that fall into a category that we all can't define, workforce, right? And they're pivotal to our community, they're pivotal to our schools, they're pivotal to our work places here in town, they're pivotal to our schools, you know, in terms of teachers, not just students, but teachers and fire department, police, all of these things, and they're beautiful apartments, and they're great places that people would want to live, I'm sure. But we have to be able to figure out a way that we've got a project that we're gonna have market rate, we're gonna have affordable, we're gonna have some workforce, you know, that people can actually live in town, because if that's one of our biggest problems, we're trying to address it. And I know you appreciate that, and I know you can't define exactly, you know, everything about the project and market rate. I get all of that. But in the same way that you can't define, we struggle with trying to make it the best we can for our community, and it is a struggle, so.
Yeah, and that's what you should do.
Just a follow-up, Brian, and it's related to the Eastwood Company's project in Brewster, the one that they've proposed. It's a proposed levy. Their market rates, when they first came in with them, the town of Brewster said, go back, we want more information. So the second or third iteration of what they proposed was similar to yours. This is a 60-unit proposal that started at 72 units. 700 square foot, 1 bedroom, 1268 affordable, 1450 market. 1100 square foot, double, 1513 affordable, 1740 market. 1350 square foot for a 3-bedroom, 1736 and $2,010 for their 3. So there's quite a delta between those prices and yours. So as when Julie asked to look at the expanded market study,
Yeah.
and where they had gone to, I'm assuming that a lot of the rates came from that Plymouth area and higher end areas. Where did Eastwood, and I know you can't answer this, or you probably can't answer this, where did Eastwood get their market study? I've requested it from the other towns on the Cape as well, which I haven't got yet. That's the only one I've been able to get my hands on so far.
Right.
But that's quite a difference in the rents.
Yeah, it is quite a difference in the rents, and we went through the exercise for our own edification to do a market rate study, because quite frankly, it's hard to get comparable rents here, because there's just not a lot of product. If you go into a town or a city that has a lot of multifamily housing, you can just kind of call up and look online and find those numbers. I don't know where they got those rent. You know, I know the principal at Eastwood Companies, and, you know, it's a number that they could have plucked out of the internet, a number that they made up, or a number that they could have had a rental study done. Like I said, we start off with what we think it would be. When we get to the point with the feasibility, we do something like this as a gut check, and like I said, it's very data intensive. It's not, it may not be what you'd like to think, or it's not precisely the area that you'd like to look at, but it's what they came up with. It could be wrong. I don't think it's far off, quite frankly. And you know, honestly, at 6 months old, it's not less, it's probably more at this point.
Okay. Julie, you had
Just mentioning that at some point, when I was on the board, I think, my memory's not that great, but the Cape Cod Commission did that extensive survey of rents, and we should probably all collectively take a look at that again, because they had, and John Admin would be familiar with that, they had a struggle themselves trying to put together an analysis, and I believe they brought in a firm from Vermont, so that's just some other info that we should all take a look at again.
Okay, I think we're set on this topic for now. New questions, Larry?
None.
You all set for now?
I'm set.
Julie?
I do have another question in terms of density. You said you're going to be able to comply with the site coverage. Thank you. The site coverage, and I guess one question is, are you able to do that? And well, it's really twofold. You've got 2 4-story buildings. They're 3 stories over parking, right?
Correct.
So with the parking underneath, that's the way you're able to meet the site coverage, I'm imagining? Is that correct?
Well, I think site coverage is just square footage of footprint versus size of land.
Well, in
So-
Harwich, they count driveways and et cetera.
Yeah, if there was no parking under the building and you spread the parking
Right.
out, you'd have
You'd
more site
exceed it.
coverage.
Right.
Right.
Would you exceed it?
Probably.
Yeah,
I don't know, but yeah.
more than likely, right?
Yeah.
So the only reason I'm asking is incorporating the parking and the height. Do you have a proposed height? Do you know what the proposed height will be?
Yes. And parking under is actually something that's been promoted. and
Oh, yeah, I'm not,
You do have the number.
I would prefer parking if I were, I'm not gonna get wet.
Yeah, for you, this is designed, and we had said this last time, just while he's getting the number. This is designed that each unit would have one space under the building.
Okay, and that, actually, just while he's doing that, just had a question on that, because when I'm looking at the report, and I don't have the page number, so forgive me, but some of the things that were not included in the rents, again, if I read it correctly, corner units, depending on the corner unit, depending on the floor, depending on whether or not you had parking enclosed, and pet fees and administration fees.
So, yes, just so you know, the market study was done before the plans were done. So part of what drove what
okay.
our plans were what the market study said. So if the market study said, build more 3-bedroom units, build smaller units, bigger units based on the target market.
So
this-
there's not an additional charge for parking then?
Certainly not on the affordable ones and probably not in the market rate because we're gonna need it just to meet capacity. So, when we originally contemplated this, we weren't convinced that we were gonna do parking under right off the bat. So this was prepared in April. I think they got the assignment in January. We were
Okay,
very preliminary with our ideas at that point in time. So these plans were generated largely off of what the demand was for the
Okay.
project.
thank you.
If you're gonna talk about the height, just go up to the microphone. You can bring that chart with you for the building if you want. For that one, okay.
Hi, Kurt Raber from Catalyst Architects. The plan up on the easel is just some of the building elevations, and the top of the page is one of the elevations of the south building, and that's the building that's closest to the police and fire station. The right margin of that drawing, there is a dimension line from grade up to the peak, and that's 53 feet 10 inches at the tallest point.
Thank you. No, that's it.
Sure. I think a lot of the questions I had about the money have already been discussed at length. So I'm going to assume you're going to come back maybe with a little more clarity on that so that we can follow what the rates are. I'm probably, unlike some of my brothers and sisters in here, because I do believe we need some density if we're ever going to solve housing. So I do applaud some density to get some numbers. So I'm willing to go that route. The concerns I had after the last meeting were twofold. One were the environmental issues, which Attorney Ford was pretty eloquent on. And if I understand your letter correctly, in the beginning, that all of those the turtles, the wetlands, there were 2 or 3 other things, those are all going to be addressed. Am I correct?
Yes, there is no impact to wetlands themselves with the proposal. There is some, that red line is that's the coastal bank? Or is that, the red line is the? There'll be a couple corners of the building are within conservation jurisdiction, but
Right.
within the outer 50, so like 100, in from 100. So those will be dealt with. The turtle, creating a turtle habitat is on that deed restricted parcel we talked about, which is to the southeast.
Way down south.
And Mr. Donovan has spoken to, no town permits are needed for that, and he's coordinating that with Natural Heritage. That can only be done at certain times, and I think it's probably November-ish. It's fall when you can, what is it's mowing? It's mowing some of the area to create turtle nesting habitat. That's going to be done and complied with. So yes, that is going to be done. And then as far as all other environmental regulations are going to be complied with.
Okay. My other concern was some of the neighbors spoke and had concerns that were kind of compelling. One gentleman in particular, lights would be shining directly into his house with a wife with some health issues. I'm assuming that's the type of issue that you would work with the neighbors. Is there some fencing or landscaping, or how do you address those issues?
So I met with Mr. Walpole within a week of that meeting at his site and told him that as the project went forward, we would address some of those issues. I think we can do a lot of that through landscaping, if we can make him happy with what, we would propose to mitigate that. His house is quite a bit above the road level, so I think that would be less of an issue. I would have to get someone who has more of a science background to understand the potential impacts of car exhaust fumes relative to his wife's condition, but, we certainly would address those issues. So.
And I'm guessing you've done other developments like that and have had success with those
Yes.
types of issues?
Yeah.
One of the other things our attorney suggested is talk about litigation on these types of projects. Do you have any ongoing projects with litigations?
Thankfully, no.
I wish we could say the same. I think that's it. I would also be interested in talking more about the, what did we call that? The memorandum of understanding, and anything else that we could add to that, like maybe bumping up the, the affordable, not the workforce, right?
Affordable.
The affordable portion from, what is it, 24 units, if that could be bumped up a little. And I don't know if there's any way to create something where Harwich people, and I'm willing to make that a broad definition, get some kind of preference into this housing. We hear about kids that, go off to college and then they can't get a job back here, some way they could be prioritized. Is that a possibility in a memorandum?
Yes, so, local preference is allowed under 40B project that we did in Hudson, Massachusetts. We provided for that, so the lottery on the affordable units were opened up to Hudson residents, not just residents, but someone who had a connection, so teachers or firemen, for example, who might not live in town but work there, were part of that lottery first, so they get first pick. So that, something like that is possible. As your council also mentioned, that we are, landlords are very under jurisdiction of federal fair housing laws that are very strict, that, non-compliance with those can create kind of a problem, but local preference is allowed in these projects.
That sounded like it's just the affordable units though, correct?
That's correct. I don't think on the market rate units you can exclude that.
Yeah,
It's not, you can only give preferential treatment to protective classes, and local residents cannot be a protective class, I
Okay.
believe.
And the other thing, I've heard the most successful housing developments like this, and I lived in one as a young professional, and I had a roommate, and that's how we afforded it. So I can kind of see two teachers sharing an apartment here. I get that. But the ones that look good and stay good, have someone living there that manages it. Is your plan to have a live-in manager on site?
Not necessarily. It sometimes happens that the community manager would live on site or the maintenance technician would live on site, but it would be staffed at least 40 hours a week. Someone would be available on call 24/7. We've been in the property management business since 1978. I think we've got a good reputation, and it's important to us. We still own the first property that started our company.
Great.
I'm second generation and my son's third generation, so
Thank you.
been around for a while.
Don?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Did I hear correctly that the plan is predicated on an average of one car per apartment for the, underneath the building?
Oh,
underneath the
underneath,
building.
yes, yeah.
But this
One car per unit, yes.
Okay, now how many other spaces were you,
So our rule of thumb is one car per bedroom, and then 25% on top of that, and that comes out to 170 something, I think, on this project. 65 spaces.
the reason I'm saying that is because we're bandying about the fact that the young professionals may be living together and combined incomes. I live in Harwich. If I had a doctor's appointment in Hyannis and I took the bus, I'd have to take it yesterday in order to get there. So I think it's unreasonable to predicate anything on the basis of mass transit here because the mass part of our transit it doesn't exist at the moment. So it's likely that people are going to, I mean, I go to the Hesh parking lot on Sisson Road. I've been to affordable housing complexes in Yarmouth, in Brewster. It's unrealistic to think that they're not going to have at least one, if not two cars per unit. Especially if you're thinking about the possibility of a working husband and wife or two people that are working together as young professionals. And even the morning figures that you had for trip generations, because some of this is predicated on how many vehicles you're going to have there. I know there's a factor guide. I mean, because Andrew alluded to it, I was on the planning board. I know that those numbers exist and they're derived mathematically, but I'm not sure how realistic they all are entirely, because one thing that you're talking about is people going to work. In some of those bigger units, I'm assuming there's going to be the 2.2 children. They go to school. Not all of them are going to take a bus.
Right.
And those are compressed into a certain time period. Those don't go from 5 to 8 o'clock. There's a very specific period that you got to get out in order to get to the high school or to the middle school.
Right. So parking is something that's often mandated by a town or a city. The numbers that we use are based on our experience. We're basing these numbers on zero public transportation. This is a car-dependent community.
Because I'm only saying that because there's no prospect of municipal parking anywhere around there.
Yeah.
And you can't park on the street.
Right.
As Andrew eloquently pointed out, this isn't a street. It's actually kind of a driveway. So it would have to be on the property somewhere.
Right.
That should be containing everything.
Those things will hurt us more than they hurt the resident or even the town, right? Because if people can't park, they won't rent there. So like I said, we're confident in that number, and we recognize that if we mess that up, it messes up the project, and we don't want that.
But also to your point, what Brian just said is they also design one car per bedroom. So to the point of people, sharing an apartment, two-bedroom apartment or something, they're trying to account for that as well.
Set? So Andrew, on timeline, I'm gonna have we're gonna have another board meeting on this to discuss questions, comments from the board and allow the public to weigh in again. And then I would have a follow-up meeting with you folks after that. Maybe the board will, at our meeting, come up with some things for a memorandum of understanding that we'll present to you at that meeting. I don't know what you have for a timeline on this project, but I would note the local initiative program in Brewster started in 2019, and they're about to go back before their housing board for the third time.
Well, there's nothing says you have to follow their rules.
Assuming you were gonna say that, and I was gonna follow that up with, I don't wanna take that long, because I hate talking about things that long. So we'll, that's my intent. So I would have to get to you with a schedule, but I'm gonna have another meeting with the board and the public.
So it's just to clarify, so if I'm hearing you correctly, are you saying you don't want to hear from the public tonight, and at the next meeting you don't want to hear from us?
I don't wanna hear from you at the next meeting. I'm gonna hear from some of the public tonight, and I wanna have a board conversation on this. Certainly I would expect that you would attend, and I will answer any questions that you have. But the board needs to process everything that we've gotten, and the board needs to do a little bit more homework, and the board needs to listen to the public. And I would hope that, you know, when I read through other towns' local initiative programs, it says robust community engagement. And so far, from the community that I've talked to, there's been not very many meetings. And judging by the lineup up here, I think a lot of people have a lot to say. And I will alert everybody that I appreciate you coming tonight. Don't repeat what somebody in front of you says, and I'm gonna limit your time to 3 minutes. It's 8:15 and we still have a full agenda in front of us, and I will bring this back again next week or the week after. Andrew, on density, unlike Mary, I've read Jay Coburn, who I believe is in the back of the room. I've read his September article that he wrote speaking of density. I've talked to a lot of housing advocates, and when we talk about density, everybody agrees it's what's best suits that community and the area that they want to build the housing. Not just density to get to this 10% number that the state made up in 1969. So for me, I look at this project, and I heard Andrew say, Attorney Singer say a little while ago, moderately dense. And I'm not sure what part of 96 units for the town of Harwich for its real first 40B project is moderate about 96 units. The town of Brewster has a 40-unit project and a 30-unit project that were conversions. They had a 72-unit project that was brought forward, and the board, through this process, got that down to 60 units so far. And they're still going through. Eastham was a rental project in an industrial zone at 72 units. So until you get to the Yarmouth and Hyannis area, these higher density projects don't really exist. So I'm not sure what part of us getting to 10% really equates to what's important to this community and what's really gonna benefit the town of Harwich. And to Julie's comments, I certainly appreciate being an employer, people needing a place to live, and that's why, for me, market rate means a lot. And getting the market rate dialed into what people that actually have these service jobs on the Cape, and I think that's where the workforce housing comments come from, can actually afford to live. So I'm not sure about the 96 units, and I would say if you put it before me tonight that I had to vote 96 units, I would not vote to support the application. Looking through all of your paperwork and looking through the purchase price of the land, I note that what the development's worth with 7 homes on it is X. What it's worth with this project approved is certainly worth Y. And if you look at your construction costs, has there been any discussions with your team about lowering the density in this project, therefore lowering hopefully your purchase price on the property and your construction costs? Does it make sense, or do we have to do the 96 units?
So I feel like I'm kind of flapping out in the breeze because you guys have all the information that we have on this project on your website. But there's a limit to that, and it's not much lower than 96 units, and it's based on density. Multifamily projects don't work at kind of small numbers unless the land cost basis is nothing, and obviously the land cost basis is a fairly large number because there's already a road there and there was a purchase and an approval of that project. So there's not a ton of room before the 40B option runs out. And this is a partnership between me and Peter and Gary and my son Jeff.
Okay, thank you.
And if I just might, Mike, so as you continue your review of this, remember that the 65-unit project in Eastham that you mentioned, and there's a 65-unit, 62-unit project in Orleans that was just approved that I was involved with both. Now, both of those projects involve CPC money, involve grants from other towns. They involve significant subsidies which let those projects change the levels and percentages of the affordability, whether it's at 80% below or above. This is not that type of project. And so you got to keep that in mind. And there have been other 40Bs in Harwich as well, smaller ones certainly. But many of those were done by nonprofits, and you were involved with several of them. And because nonprofits can access grant money and other subsidizing funds, those types of projects have a different economic framework than these types of projects, which we consider a market rate developer trying to do affordable housing. And so I just ask you to keep those in mind as well. This is not a project that's asking for, $1 million or $2 million from the CPC and for other things to go forward. Those play a role as well.
Thank you. Attorney Singer.
No.
Okay, we're gonna move on. I'm gonna have to get some questions if you guys wanna go back to the audience. I'm gonna get some comments from the public, and obviously you're gonna
Thank you
take
very
notes on those. But we're not gonna get into a back and forth with the proponents versus the people against tonight. Name for the record, please.
Thank you. Clara McClarty from East Harwich.
Just lastly, again, 3 minutes time. That's it.
Yes. What makes a community? Is it just any assembled group of employers and employees? And the infrastructure that's needed to accommodate them? Or is it people rooted in a place and its culture, people connected to the land and each other, intergenerational and mutually nourishing relationships? I grew up on Cape Cod. My dad was a historic wooden boat builder here in Harwich. I've lived my life among those who earn, quote, below medium income. My mom currently lives with a friend because her landlord abruptly decided to sell in August. My dad moved out of state because he couldn't afford to buy a home here when he retired. One of my sisters lives in affordable housing locally and earnestly hopes to get out of there when she can. None of you can accuse me of being a snob who just doesn't like those icky low-income people. Many of us locals who grew up here do share a deep concern for this place and its culture. We share a sadness for the cleared woodlands, the pollution, the loved ones who move away. We know it's obvious that for many years, the interests of financially profitable construction have been overrepresented to the detriment of the environment, the natural world, the historical charm, and the community of year-round residents. It's the way of the world. It's progress. It's inevitable. Globalization can't be stopped. These are the things they tell us. I recognize that there are far more minimum wage jobs open than there are people to fill them. But my first question is why? Now, a lawyer for a land developer wants me to believe it's because we need apartments. We need density. We need big buildings now. The problem is just this lack of density, they say. There's no other way. They've analyzed the market, and the state has incentivized it. You get points for playing along. I want to thank the board in advance for representing the actual people of Harwich and considering our concerns in the face of these complex inequities that we are all battling. Thank you for recognizing that there is no simple one-size-fits-all solution. Please bear in mind that the environmental degradation is a very serious concern of the so-called poor, not just an excuse that's proffered by elitists. Thank you for making sure that struggling year-round families do not foot the sewer bill for profitable developments. We thank you for doing your best to represent us and our precious land against this tidal wave of real estate pressure that we're experiencing. We really need your thoughtful representation. Thank you again.
Thank you, Claire.
Kathy Clobridge, Harwich. I read with interest the Selectmen's packet, and on page 19, I did note that in the project benefits list, one of the items listed, which has been previously mentioned tonight, was that the project will comply with MISA and HESP regulations and either seek an amendment to existing approval or redesign site layout, et cetera. I've been watching this site for many years, over 20. Things, I guess, were done differently a number of years ago in Harwich when I first got here. It seemed like at least if someone said they were going to do something, they would do it. In February 2016, the Conservation Commission approved a roadway with 5 conditions. Those included the box turtle protection plan, box turtle nesting habitat creation, and proposed mechanism of funding nesting habitat and maintenance. Same month, February 2016, planning approved a subdivision subject to conditions, including receiving all necessary approvals from NHESP. They even gave the developer some leeway on the road and grading. 2016 April, an 8-page nesting habitat improvement and management plan was presented. Now what we know 5 years later was that no plan was ever implemented, nothing was done. Eastern box turtles can live to be over 100. The primary cause of their decline, habitat loss. So I'm here really speaking for the species that I share my neighborhood with, and the very sad prospect of a piece of property where we had a lot of species and they weren't treated in a way that was promised. Also, at the same time, at that planning board meeting in February, the plan was approved, and Joe McPartland at the time presented some findings, and they had to do with the impact of the development on that site, and the approval was based on that. And those findings are certainly not met by this development. But what I want to say is, somebody that wouldn't implement these promised controls and promised plans, it's obvious how important this was to the state, how important it was to the community there of wildlife and for the turtles themselves. So I just want to be the voice for that and say, I don't know how we can expect someone who's asking for more, who didn't do what they were going to do in the first place, why we should trust and want to work with them.
Thank you.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman. I'm Jay Coburn, and I lead the Community Development Partnership. We own 24 units of housing at Robert Lane, 836 Main Street, and at Thankful Chase's Pathway here in Harwich. We're a nonprofit with a mission to build a stronger, more diverse year-round community through supporting small businesses and creating more affordable housing. I'm not an expert on this particular project, but I really want to make the point tonight that this is a unique opportunity for the town to work together with the developer and to take a big step forward in solving the town's affordable housing crisis and leverage significant private sector investment at no cost to the Harwich taxpayer. I want to commend you for engaging in this dialogue and trying to find a path forward to support a project that will address the needs of the community and is also economically viable. Our housing affordability problem is big, and it requires big solutions. Some have expressed some concerns over the size of this project. And I think Mr. Singer made a really good point. Let's make sure that we compare apples and apples, that this project is not using land provided for free by the town. This project is not asking for several $1 million in subsidy from the town, that this is leveraging private sector investment. Small scattered site developments of less than 40 units are just not financially viable. And if you do try to build them, they require huge investment for the town. We just have to look over in Orleans to look at the RFP that they put out for 16 units of housing. The economics on that project for 16 units are asking the town to contribute over $140,000 per unit. Whereas the larger projects of 65 in Eastham, that project was built for a town's contribution of about $33,000 per unit. So the reality is that density is required in order to make these projects economical. Small site developments are also only going to contribute to suburban sprawl and use up open space. And I would argue that larger projects are actually the most environmentally responsible projects for us to build. They can support on-site wastewater treatment and eliminate nitrogen. The larger projects are also much more energy efficient. We have proposed to build a 46-unit project in Wellfleet that will be net zero in energy consumption due to solar panels and energy efficient building. These units, both the affordable units that are going to come at no cost to the town and the market rate units, are desperately needed. Employers are crying out for places for their employees to be able to live so that their businesses can be successful. And I really encourage you to work together with this developer and take advantage of this great opportunity to make a significant contribution in addressing the town's affordable housing crisis. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Jay Walpole, 214 Sisson, right across the street from the end of that driveway, Chloe's Path. I have a document about airway oxidative stress and inflammation markers in chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, COPD patients are linked with exposure to traffic-related air pollution study. The objective of the study is to investigate the effects of short-term exposure to traffic-related air pollution on airway oxidative stress and inflammation in chronic obstructive pulmonary disease patients. I will give you a copy of this. The conclusion is our results suggest that short-term exposure to traffic-related air pollution was responsible for exacerbation of airway oxidative stress and inflammation in COPD patients. My wife has COPD and asthma. Okay, here's a copy for you, and you can spread that for you.
Thanks, Jim.
Thank you, Ms. Walpole. Thank you. In addition, when we talk about density, I understand the density for Harwich to be at 532 per square mile. My calculation with the property density on this one is 35 times greater than the average density in our town. So you can take a look at that, do the expected population against the acreage, and you'll find what that is. Okay? Electric heat, I understand the building is going to be electric heat. And we're talking about affordability? Come on. So you're going to have 3-bedroom apartments with low-income people and electric heat? There's a gas line right on Sisson Road. Why aren't they utilizing that? In addition, as you're planning for your parking, you need to plan for some electric charging systems for the people that are buying all electric cars, because by 2025, that will be one of the major components. Some of the dealers or some of the manufacturers are talking about doing away with gas altogether, which will help some of my problem with air pollution. It was mentioned that Mr. Bush had stopped over to my house, and he did. He was very polite and very helpful in his explanation. However, his explanation was to mitigate the problems at my house on my property. If you're going to mitigate the problems that you create, you need to mitigate them on your property, not mine. Bus stop. The bus stop on top of the people coming and going. You've got school buses, you've got service vehicles, you've got snow plows, and you've got lawn mowing. You've got, excuse me, you've got a crosswalk that's going to have a stop sign for people to be able to cross that street. So every time somebody stops, they have to accelerate right in front of my house. Every time somebody leaves the Chloe property, they're going to accelerate right in front of my house. And with what I've demonstrated already with COPD patients, my wife, then you're putting her at risk. So you need to mitigate that. Route 124, I believe, is a state road, and that was brought up earlier, that state roads had different rules. I think we need to take a look at what that impact might be. And we had 7 units approved in that property. You could put 4 units of affordable housing or 28 affordable housing units in that property with the current approval with no change. And that would be meeting the needs for the town and not meeting the needs for the investor, but meeting the needs for the town. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sandy McClarty, East Harwich. It's been stated that this will have no environmental impact, that also it was stated by Mr. Singer that the nitrogen load would be less than if you had 7 units, regular homes. And then a gentleman said that there's no cost to the community, the gentleman that left earlier. This is just patently false. It's either ignorant or willfully deceptive. We have to get into the numbers a little bit. The amphidrome that they're proposing is going to clean the water to 10 milligrams per liter, not the 2 to 3 milligrams per liter that was provided to you in the packet on the brochure. I called amphidrome, and this is what they're designing it to. So if you take the average home that doesn't have a treatment system, it's 26.25 milligrams per liter. And if you do the math, you run it out, it's based on water consumption. The average home in Harwich is about 182 gallons per day. If you extrapolate that out, MEP, Massachusetts Estuaries Project uses 55 gallons per day per person.
Sandy, you're losing me. We're talking about science right now with non-scientists, except for Larry at the table, without our wastewater expert here tonight and without their wastewater. So
This
I
is
would
for the
suggest we move it along quicker, and then I will let you speak next week or the week after when I bring back our experts and we talk about the wastewater component.
I'm sorry, but
Please
this,
move on, but I'm not going to allow you to continue to talk about science with non-scientists sitting at this table. That's your facts that you've created. We don't have somebody here to verify that, so I'm not going to allow it.
so you're not allowing me to speak about that.
I'm not going to allow you to speak about science and homes and nitrogen removal, not tonight. Not doing it.
So this is a nitrogen crisis, and you don't want to hear about it,
Not tonight.
okay?
I'm not making a decision tonight, Sandy. That's an important fact.
We
are not-
listened to Mr. Singer for 30 minutes talk about stuff he's already talked about.
And I gave you 3 minutes, so you got about a minute and a half left without my interruption.
Okay, I'm going to read from the Board of Health. You guys said that this is going to be flow neutral, sewers are not going to impact density. This is on your website. Article 12, Regulation Land Use Control Wastewater Flow Management. The Harwich Board of Selectmen are adopting this new sewer use regulation article that will ensure manage smart growth and prevent excessive growth based on availability of municipal sewer service. An applicant seeking to alter the sewer service area or flow within a sewer service area shall be responsible for all costs associated with that change, including potential for filing, blah, blah, blah. This is going to add $3 to $6 million to Harwich residents. This is adding a burden, a real burden. It's preposterous to say that this is not affecting Grass Pond. We're not even talking about phosphorus. This is adding in the vicinity. Forget the science. Let's avoid science. So the idea that we're not impacting is false, and we are impacting, and I believe it's crucial to the discussion, if we allow this, to consider that impact to the average person, the average year-round person. The cost is astronomical to the average person. It was said that the zoning for that area doesn't allow 4 stories. Why are we even considering 4 stories? The 4 stories that are allowed in other areas shouldn't even be there. We're constantly being asked to expand zoning to allow density, and it's going to solve our problems. And I'm saying, and I spoke to Dan Pelletier, this is adding 89 units beyond the 7 units that would be there. This is impacting the CWMP. It was stated that it doesn't. That's a lie. It's impacting the water in the Saquatucket watershed, and it needs to be evaluated.
Sandy, can you do me a favor and send that to the board? Okay.
Good evening. My name is Karen Beatty, and I'm the owner of 195 Sisson Road. I just wanted to make the board aware that there has been no further public community outreach by this development team. After hearing extensive concerns from direct butters regarding concerns about privacy, noise and light pollution, traffic, and general safety in 2 public meetings, no one has reached out with plans for mitigation or alternative solutions. My property sits right in front of this proposed development, and I've heard nothing from the developer, Mr. Singer, Mr. Bush. If they have reached out to community members, they have done it selectively. This development is not properly screened from existing homes on Sisson, and I would imagine also on Forest, in terms of sight, light, noise pollution, privacy, and safety. There is no fencing. There is no landscaping considerations. There's potentially 300 people with direct view and access to my backyard and my kitchen window. There have been no attempts to communicate with all homeowners to mitigate these issues or maintain or even attempt harmony with the current community. To speak briefly to the affordability, or more accurately, the non-affordability, to our understanding of what workforce housing is on Cape Cod, these numbers for market rate as well as for affordable housing are out of touch with the reality of our actual workforce. I'm a public school teacher, and these so-called affordable rents are more than the mortgage on my 3-bedroom house on Sisson. I would be priced out of your plan for affordable housing even with a lottery for preference. I thank the board for seeing the flaws in the numbers when compared with the reality of workforce on Cape Cod. We need numbers that work for our local community, not that work to line the developers' pockets and disrupt a community. This is not an economically viable plan for the people that currently live and work here. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, Elizabeth Harder. I'm not speaking to the merits. I just have a couple of questions that maybe could be for things that could potentially be put in an MOI if you have one. I believe one of the ways that we could keep the rents down would be a requirement, if legal, that the apartments be used year-round. If you don't have that requirement, that's how you get the people who can afford to pay $10,000 a month for an apartment they're going to use 2 months a year when they come down from Boston, or maybe on the occasional weekend. So I think if you could have an agreement that the renters must be year-round, that would help keep the rents down. The other thing that I'd like to see, should you go through with an MOU, would be an agreement that these never be allowed to be turned into condominiums, because that, again, would completely take away the point. If we're going to agree to change zoning requirements for density and height, it would be because we have the need for rental apartments. So by letting a developer build it, have 3 years of rental apartments, and then sell them for condos at $1 million, that totally ruins the point of what we're trying to accomplish. So those are my thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the board. Peter Gorey, 226 Sisson Road. Thank you. I'm going to ask you to consider a few questions for a discussion of an MOU or a downsized project, which I hope the developers will consider, recognizing that there are market forces to bear. I'll throw out a couple of questions, but I think my testimony and questions tonight are changing as the testimony goes forward, because even Attorney Singer acknowledged that this, in fact, is a market rate proposal. 75% of this project is market rate. And I think most of us can agree, most observers, Mr. Bush said he built a house here in Harwich. 96 units is a convenient way, in my opinion, of not saying 100. It reads better. Mr. Fraser's article from August 27th in the Cape Cod Times noted one project of 60 units and everything else much smaller. And Mr. I think Colson, who just left, was only talking about, we're talking about the lower Cape and the outer Cape, as the chair mentioned. This is outside, and it's grossly outsized for this location, this site, and this context, period, in my opinion, and I think that of my neighbors. We have been and would be happy to sit with Mr. Bush and Mr. Donovan and the team, but let me throw out a couple of questions for the team, hopefully that are technical, and we're not going to have a back and forth, but I will submit them in writing subsequently, Mr. Chair, if I may. The first thing regarding, actually, I would submit this to town council as well. I believe if you're going to keep this from the zoning board of appeal in the near term, and I respect that that's the advice of council, cannot the conservation commission and the planning board take it up sooner, if only in an advisory capacity? I ask that because both the Concom and the planning board weighed in on the 7-unit subdivision. In fact, they weighed in on the 9-unit subdivision. I also would submit, my understanding is from the Housing Trust, Mr. Howell may be aware of this, that a project of about half the size with a different development partner other than Heritage was brought to the Housing Trust and not even did not get past first base, if you will. That may have been a market condition. That might have been because they didn't have the deal. Why was a project half the size brought to them? Why was a 7-unit project that was downsized to a 7 not enough? I think we understand, and frankly and respectfully, this is not altruism. This is a market rate project masquerading as an affordable project that is using an antiquated tool of 40B to get through. And I think we're sitting here, again, if I may, because they know that the project will be an unfriendly 40B if they don't get your support. What I would request, and I asked last time for a seat at the table, I don't mean me personally, I mean metaphorically, the town has an opportunity right now to draw a line in the sand. This project is too large. Something smaller could probably get built and could probably get all of our support in the surrounding area if it was discussed in the light of day, transparently and honestly. Specifically, I will ask VHB to consider next time, did you do a level of service analysis at 39 and Sisson Road? Will you, to the development team, consider a smaller project formally? I respect, again, you do not have to do that unless an MOA was discussed. And then a couple other specifics that came up. Mr. Singer talked about likely 2 wage earners and even a 1-bedroom. We're talking about 2 young adults, potentially with a child, in a 2-bedroom. That's 2 cars. Let's be serious and real about these numbers. And then lastly, forgive me, Ms. Kavanaugh, thank you for spending so much time, all of you, on this analysis and reading all these documents so thoroughly. We're talking about comps that we were looking at in Hyannis and Plymouth. The editorial in the Cape Cod Times I mentioned before, none of those projects was of the size of anything that was in Hyannis or Plymouth. And lastly, I think this is important for town council to explore too. My understanding is that the project could drop its affordability through 40B to 20% on site for 50% AMI earners. That's my understanding. 40B allows for 20% on site for people earning 50% of the AMI and lower. That's true affordability. That's true affordability. I'm not suggesting that all my neighbors would want such a project next to them, but that's true affordability. Furthermore, typically, and forgive me because I worked in the city of Boston, typically the industry standard for workforce housing is 80 to 120% AMI. That is not a law, as Mr. Howell and others noted, but that is an industry standard. Why not a project with 20%, 50% AMI, 50%, 80 to 120? Then get into the market. Again, this is a market rate project masquerading as an affordable project, and I respectfully thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Good evening, members of the board. I also choose to keep my mask on, unlike Mr. Hart. I am my company, and that's what the rules are. Good to see you, Randy. So I rise to represent Bob and Andrea Doan, and they, of course, live on Forest Street, and they own one of the parcels that's been the subject of some of the back and forth tonight, and that's where I'd like to go back and focus for a minute, because this is one of the things that I tried to bring to the board's attention at the first meeting. Mr. Valentine raised the question to Attorney Singer, are you complying with the deed restriction? Where's that Lot B2? Mr. Doan owns Lot B2. It was conveyed to him in a land swap in which he conveyed some property to the owners to allow the subdivision to occur. And yes, there is a deed restriction, Mr. Valentine, on B2. And yes, there was supposed to be a turtle program which was to be implemented by Mr. Donovan for the last 5 years, and nothing's been done. And that property is deed restricted. What I tried to bring to the board's attention last time, and I've heard no response to it other than in the list of benefits that Mr. Singer passed in, is that they will comply with everything that is applicable from MESA. Well, if you looked at the letter that Mr. Doan submitted last time, and I hope you all have, it was dated July 26th, it attached the 2 subdivision plans. And this is important because the 2 subdivision plans, and if I may approach Mr. Chairman just to hand it to you so that maybe you could pass it around as I'm discussing it. The 2 subdivision plans are simply 2 pages. It's one subdivision plan. It was 9 lots. 7 were to be developed. Lot 9 is undevelopable. That's the one directly behind the small lots behind the fire station because of its irregular shape. And Lot 8 was conveyed to the town as an open space parcel. It's just wetland. So if you examine the other 7 lots in what was attached, you'll see areas outlined in yellow. And those areas outlined in yellow on each lot are the building envelopes that are permitted currently under the MESA deed restriction. Make no mistake about it, this property, not just Mr. Doan's property, is subject to a deed restriction. This is not a permit. This is not an approval. When this subdivision was approved, the owners voluntarily restricted their property from development, and the only thing that can be developed is those building envelopes without further permission from MESA. What permission is that? It's a waiver of the deed restriction. The areas that are outside the yellow are areas that, as Mr. Singer aptly described them, are supposed to be forever wild. Forever wild. Don't make that a misnomer. That's what was coveted. It was a contract. It was not a permit. It's a covenant. It runs with the land. And it can only be amended by MESA. And so my argument the last time and my argument again tonight is this. Since they don't have the property rights to build what they're proposing because it's located outside those envelopes, it's located in the forever wild areas in part, I would say to the developer respectfully, when you go to MESA and you get that changed and you have a right to develop these parcels where you're showing development, then we can talk. But until then, they don't have standing to bring this before you. And so when Mr. Singer says tonight, oh, we've got all the environmental problems solved, in response to Selectman Anderson's question. So are all the environmental problems resolved? Oh, yes, the deed-restricted parcel, we're going to do the turtle stuff we haven't done for 5 years. So we're going to do it on the deed-restricted parcel. That's deed-restricted. Not just Mr. Doan's property. That has a deed restriction. That has a covenant. They haven't said other than, well, we'll go and redesign it, or we'll get a waiver. And yes, there has been a change in the atlas upon which box turtles are protected. But it doesn't change this covenant until there is a waiver. And so I'd suggest respectfully, rather than waste everybody's time and get the neighborhood all riled up and have this, frankly, good discussion about affordable housing generally, tell them until they have the property rights to go forward with this, we can't sit down and start to draft an MOU and partner. They want to keep pressing on that. Why? Because if they get you to sign the application, the LIP application, goes up to DHCD, they get the process started, they think the momentum will continue to go, and they'll be able to go to MESA and say, hey, look, the town wants this for affordable housing. That's not the way this should go. The town approved this as 7 lots on the basis that that covenant was signed. It's property rights. It's not just a permit. You can't go and cram it down in a 40B process. You can't go to Mesa and say, under 40B, we want you to waive this. It doesn't work that way. Mesa's requirements are different. They're not subject to 40B, and they're not crammed down by 40B the way other regulations are. So please, take a look at that issue again. Get your good counsel's advice on it. I don't think they have standing to come forward as yet, and I'd ask you to look at it again. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. I see Amy taking good notes for us. Thank you, Amy. With that, I'm going to close this. We can, Andrew will set up Attorney Singer, sorry, we'll set up a meeting coming up.
Yeah, I have no problem with that. The only thing I would ask is, Rick, that you, when you schedule these meetings, if you're going to be hearing from the public, and that's wonderful, but you said you're not going to be hearing from us, I know we'll be in the room. If there's going to be dialogue between you and the public, I think the applicant should have a right to be part of that,
You got it.
and vice versa.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you. Thank you, Andrew.
Give the room a minute to clean out, and we'll move on to some of this.
I'm asking you projected time of end tonight.
Much earlier. But it was good discussion.
It was good discussion.
Thank you, Amy.
Sorry, I keep forgetting.
We're short one, huh?
All right, now we have almost an empty room. If you can
Thanks for
social
sticking around.
distance, you can take your masks off. Which I will exercise that right. Thank you.
Yeah, 'cause now I put mine on and I can't see.
I get all teared up too.
Update on 2021 Harwich Special Town Meeting warrant articles. Joe?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. Very quickly but succinctly, I will tell you that 14 days away from our special town meeting, of course, in 14 days at this hour, we'll be long since adjourned, home watching Monday Night Football after having gone through the articles. The update this evening is to just inform the board first before we go to the motions meeting later this week. As it relates to Article 3, which you may recall has the headline of Fund Costs Related to Wastewater Collection System Design on Continental Drive and Witta Drive, the expectation is that there will be a motion to indefinitely postpone, as the purpose of the article is no longer necessary. I was informed recently by the water wastewater superintendent. The purpose of this article, with the appropriation of $400,000, was to create design documents if we were unable to acquire those. CDM Smith was able to go through their records and materials and confirm that they have the design materials available, and therefore there's no necessity for us to go forward on this. So I wanted to first make the board aware of that. You'll hear that those of us that participate in the motions meeting will have that discussion about it, and of course I'll inform the finance committee so that they're aware of this as well, but I wanted to first bring that to the board's attention.
Thank you. Mary?
Can we somehow notify the Continental Witta people so they don't misconstrue it, that we're not gonna?
So we have, and we will continue to do so, meaning
Okay.
the chair, the superintendent, and I met with representatives in that group.
Okay.
We told them we were working on that effort, but it was premature at that point. So I know that Dan has been in touch with them, and we will continue to be in touch with them on this matter, and they'll be advised directly that that issue is not necessary to go forward.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
All set on that one, Joe?
Yes, thank you.
Any questions from the board?
No.
All set? New business, discussion and possible vote to approve Board of Selectmen minutes for May 3rd, 2021. Mary?
I move that we vote to approve the Board of Selectmen minutes for May 3rd, 2021.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye, 5-0, Joe.
Thank you.
B, Mary?
I move that we vote to approve committee appointments recommended by the Interview Committee. Lynn Ellen Zalisak?
Zalisak.
Zalisak, Brooks Academy Museum Commission, full position, term to expire June 30th, 2023. Francis Saluski, Bikeways Committee, full position, term expires June 30, 2022. Jeff Brown, Agricultural Commission, full position, term expires June 30, 2022. Noella Morrison, Treasure Chest Committee, alternate position, term expires June 30, 2022. Eleanor Gerson, Treasure Chest Committee, full position, term expires June 30, 2022. Maureen Davis, Treasure Chest Committee, full position, term expires June 30, 2023. Cindy Bolio, Treasure Chest Community, full position, term expires June 30, 2024.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion?
None.
Only question I have, interview committee, are all of these Harwich residents?
They are.
Thank you. And has there been any discussion about the non-Harwich resident that still remains on the board?
There has, but Don, you want to?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think somebody actually needs to contact him directly, because there's no provision under the charter, unless he willingly resigns, for us to remove somebody that we have appointed, because the charter doesn't say they must reside in Harwich. It says that the people that we appoint should there should be a preference to Harwich residents. And this one particularly really should be. But we need to contact him to see if he's willing, because there could be another opening if that were the case.
Would that be contacted by the interview committee?
Yeah, I'm willing to do that. We talked about it, and I have no problem talking with him, but we wanted to bring in for full board, because he has a desire to do it, and he's been a fairly effective chairman, so.
We'll bring this back.
Although there is an opportunity for him to continue to volunteer there. There's two different things going on that site.
So I'll bring it back for conversation. Okay, on the appointments read, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. 5-0, Joe?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If I could very quickly, just want to advise the board that Ellen would kill me if I didn't get this out, but based on your votes this evening, she'll be updating the vacancy list and sending it out to the board hopefully this week. So she'll keep you informed. Thank you.
Thank you. Discussion to rename the Harwich Energy Committee to the Harwich Energy and Climate Committee, along with to amend the committee charge to reflect the realignment of the committee. We could take this up tonight, or we could vote to bring it back if you'd like, but it seemed pretty straightforward to me. I included a sample in the packet from the town of Chatham, which has addressed this, along with the documents that Ed McManus supplied to us before his last board meeting. Ed's was clearly a lot longer and a lot more involved. I think that the Climate Committee in Chatham, Climate Energy Committee, would be a good start for us, and a good start for that group to bring something a little bit more formal back to us. But I personally don't believe that we need to start with the long charge of a new committee without establishing what we're gonna do first. And I'll open that up to discussion from the board, and I'll start with Mary.
Deer in the headlights. Yeah, I agree. Let's not make it more, we're not gonna solve the climate crisis here in Harwich, so let's just start a little more simply.
Don?
I agree, and the Chatham charge is a good basis. A couple of things have to be changed for obvious reasons, but I'm with Mary. And it's particularly frightening if we actually, Ed's recommendation was to associate this with money for them to go out and spend. And I think if it gets to that point, we probably should be involved right here.
Larry? I'm only skipping you for a reason. Larry?
What
Bounce around a little bit, all right?
What do you want me to say, Julie? I'm thinking about this, because I don't want to, I'm not going to try to influence or debate it, but I would not vote for this myself right now. And that's because I prefer rational discussions when I see terms thrown out there of climate crisis and code red, and making this, this becomes more of a political statement than an action statement. And I wish, You have to take climate as a serious. Anyone that doesn't is a fool. But we need a rational discussion, and we need to lower the temperature some so that happens. And so I could go along with a more defined charge, but on this one, I would vote against it. As I say, it's my personal feeling. I wouldn't try to change your mind on that, any of that. I just can't do it. There's,
And are you referring to what the Chatham's charge
What the
is?
Chatham's
Okay.
is,
Thank
yes.
you, Larry. Yep, thank you. Julie?
Yeah, I would like to bring it back only because I was, the liaison to the Energy Committee when Larry Cole, who was a fantastic resource,
Yeah.
right? So, I'd like to look at how we incorporate that, and I was reading through and looking at Chatham's, and so I can see that they could come together. I also might want to see two different things. I'm not quite sure on where I stand on that yet, so I'd like to look at it a little bit.
Okay. The board okay with bringing that back for discussion on a night that isn't
Absolutely.
after 9?
Absolutely.
Joe, we're gonna bring that one back in the near future. And I would just ask the board so that we're not starting from scratch to put your ideas together, so that night we can make a decision. We did, there was a resolution passed at town meeting that asked us to come up with a committee on this.
and that's why I'm stating my position, not to change town meetings. I'm not, it's gonna happen.
What's that?
But sometimes you have to say how you feel.
Thank you, Larry. Bring it back soon. Discussion and possible vote on the Harwich Affordable Housing Trust Housing Coordinator. Joe?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So you have companion items D, which is the position itself, and then companion item E, that if this description and job are to go forward and be confirmed, that we would want to have it placed in the personnel bylaws as presented. So first you have the memorandum from the Assistant Town Administrator, who has a span of control over human resource issues. And so you can, I would say that I think her memorandum stands for itself. It's pretty self-explanatory, and going to be right up front with the board and tell you that we relied upon existing position descriptions in other towns, but then analyzed it and tried to make it fit for the town of Harwich. So that's what's being contemplated under D. And then if you agree with that, the question would be, where does it reside? I will argue that it should reside under personnel bylaws, where many if not all of the part-time positions in the town reside. And so that's what my memorandum under E talks about, is the mechanism by which it would be added there, where it would be located within the classification and compensation tables, and then the actual compensation levels themselves. So I'd be more than happy to answer any questions from the board.
Thank you, Joe. Julie, I will start with you.
So I have no problem with that. I read through it. I mean, I guess my only question would be, and maybe you've had discussion that I've missed in the past, even a full-time person, but I don't really know that, currently the budget can handle that, but I just think a full-time person's just got us that much more involved with the housing trust.
If I may respond, this effort is to first start with the position that was funded, and that's been contemplated, and Mr. Howell can speak better than I, has been contemplated by the town since the creation of the Affordable Housing Trust, going back to 2018. So this effort tonight, if it goes forward, as well as the planning board, personnel board, where'd that one come from? Personnel bylaw, there we go, it's getting late. Would allow us to establish the position, but we've already contemplated exactly what you were talking about.
Okay.
We have $50,000 of funding from CPC, which allows us to fund a part-time position. We have a request before CPC for that funding to occur next fiscal year as well. However, we could contemplate expanding through any number of articles or budgets to create that to go from part-time to full-time. Of course, we'd then get away from the CPC articles. Not necessarily a bad thing, but this at least starts the process and relies upon the funding that we have. And I would also argue that it is not a new position, because under the charter, a new position requires specific action by town meeting and all that. I think this is well contemplated to go part-time to full-time, and we could do all that.
Okay.
So this is a start, and we've talked about that for no other reason than we also need to talk about benefits. As we learned from the town of Brewster, we can't rely upon CPC funds for fringe benefits, nor does the town presently have any appropriation for that either. So we'd want to correct it going forward for future town meetings for sure.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, that's kind of where my question was coming from, is that previously we talked about, that, and then we had, I think we had CDP doing, right? So I think this is a good first start, so yeah, I'm totally in favor of this.
Thank you. Larry?
I think I looked at the same question, Julie. I looked at it a little bit differently in that the job description is that basically the definition is walk on water. And even if we're full-time, and you look at part-time, I was not sure how any one person could do all that. So I'm suggesting you might want to review that and pull out the top priorities or that we're doing to make it, something that's doable rather than I won't use that phrase again, but you know where I'm coming from.
I do.
My second question is, what was the basis of the salary?
So the basis of the salary, to work backwards, as you'll see in my memo under item E,
That's what I thought you
was
did.
simply
Work
that
backwards
we had up to
$50,000.
$50,000. But if you look at, so
That's the
from,
appropriate way of doing it, rather than look at the position description and
Well,
where you go? That was my question. I saw how you did it.
yeah, so to answer your question, yes and no. Meaning, if I had my druthers and was able to approach this as the chief personnel administrator working with HR, we would have developed it completely different. However, recognizing that the town has ascribed a value to that position, over the last 3 years of $50,000, we knew that we had a cap. And again, we're talking about intrinsic value where, so a part-timer can earn up to $50,000. We're not saying that a full-timer would earn up to $100,000, but we would want to ascribe value to that position going forward. So normally I wouldn't do that. But given that there's a need to create the position and get it moving, what I did under item E is to say, okay, we have upwards of $50,000. You stretch that out over a compensation plan, and you can see what I'm recommending under item E is that steps 1 through 4 keep that person under the $50,000, but we have a 10-step plan, and everything we do, you want to have growth in the future. So that was really the way that we did it. It's a little bit cart before the horse.
You would really look at that if we took the next step and make the salary be based on the position rather than sort of back into it.
So the concern there was because the value's already been ascribed, meaning it's no secret that the town's gonna be looking for a part-time housing coordinator. We know what other towns are getting and paying for that. We need to be competitive. And I think, like I say, it's no secret that every year for the last 3 years, we've been seeking $50,000 for this role. So I think any contemplative applicant is gonna know that the town has at least $40,000 to spend on it. Going past that is not an option presently because it goes back to the CPC article. So if we wanted to go greater, if we wanted to do a full-time this year, I don't know that we can mechanically, but if we wanted to increase the salary, we don't have an appropriation mechanism to do that. And then it calls into question what the intent was for CPC as well. So to me, there was a lot of moving parts to consider.
Set?
Yeah.
Mary?
I agree with Larry that it does sound like a walk-on-water type job. And the only other thing is, I know where you stole this from, because you've got to go in and change the housing partnership to the housing committee.
So we missed a couple?
Yeah, you missed a couple.
Thank you for that, Mary.
It was
I was wondering
dangling
where that came from.
It was an endeavor to get it in front of the board, post haste. Probably less
Yeah, it's
haste
just-
and more post.
Just a little cleanup there.
Sure.
And certainly, I think most job descriptions I've had in my life read like that, if I did everything it said there. So I guess I'm okay with that, but when we're sitting with the person, we'll have to, the priorities are 1, 4, and 7, or whatever.
And to that point, this job description relates to a position that's being contemplated, put into the personnel bylaws. That it means it's under my span of control as your personnel administrator. And so we have greater flexibility. Rather than if it was under a collective bargaining association, we would have to impact bargain. So if you endorse this tonight, either in part or in whole, I still have the ability to make amendments to it and certainly seek guidance from the board, to restrict or add or whatever the case may be. But we at least get it codified.
Yep.
And to me, you want to add that line in the personnel bylaws under item E, but not before you recognize some position description to do it.
I'm good with that.
Don?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In answer to Larry's question and something that Julie brought up, first of all, there's nothing here that hasn't already been going on with the Housing Trust. The problem is especially over the last year, we've been talking about this for a couple of years at the Trust. And especially over the last year, I found myself in the unenviable position where I was relying on trust members to actually get the deal done with the Marceline property. My dining room was a mess. They're not going to be on their own, but it is the glue with which we can keep everything together, because hypothetically, you're supposed to set up agendas, get in contact with either state officials or project managers and get them in. So they have to, I mean, this stuff has to be in there, because you can't delegate something to somebody if it doesn't appear that it's part of their job description. We had gone from 35,000, just in all fairness, because.
Thank you, that might have been before my time, but thank you.
Yeah, it started out at 35. I asked for 50, presupposing that it was going to be put into the town government at some point. We were solely waiting for the support of management and the board to coalesce around having it in-house, because it was really difficult to be able to articulate that when we were worried about whether we were going to keep the town open under a pandemic. But this was the direction all along that everybody in the trust wanted to take, so I would urge you to support that with the change that there's a housing committee, not a, you've got to make a couple of editorial Scribner changes here.
Can I get a motion?
I move that we vote to create the Harwich Affordable Housing Trust Housing Coordinator.
Second.
That's a mouthful.
It is.
Moved in second. And my only discussion is we're making some great strides in housing it, and we can talk about this ad nauseum, or we can start to advertise and get somebody. It's time to get somebody that works for the town of Harwich and isn't part of another group that's working for multiple people. We need our own person. Don?
Yeah, and further what Michael's saying, there has not been a physical presence involved in the town of Harwich. The hours were kind of ill-defined. There were some Facebook postings, but we need to own it, and it has to be in a fixed spot where people can get in touch with the person they need to get in touch with.
Thank you, Don. Elizabeth?
Hi, Elizabeth Harder again. I'm going to request that you change the name of the title. Everything in the description of the job is fabulous, but the title implies that the responsibility is only to the Affordable Housing Trust, whereas in the discussion it says they're also to work with other entities such as the CPC and the Housing Committee.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Thoughts on that? Joe?
If the motion is to accept the job description refers to it as housing coordinator.
Yep.
The second item in the personnel bylaws refers to it as housing coordinator.
Yeah. That's a better title.
Yeah, well, that's what it is. That's what we're approving.
Questions, Mary?
No.
Elizabeth, does that get you where you were?
It's just the motion said Affordable Housing Trust Coordinator.
Okay.
So
Change the motion.
Yeah, thank
I
you.
move that we vote to create the Harwich Housing Coordinator position.
And moved in second. So
With-
that
with-
is the
with some
motion.
Scrivener
Mary's
changes.
Yeah.
With some Scrivener changes.
I'll change the Scrivener stuff. Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye, 5-0, Joe.
Thank you.
Second one you can do,
I
Mary.
move that we vote to amend the personnel bylaws to reflect the position of housing coordinator.
Second.
Affordable Housing Coordinator.
Housing coordinator.
Housing
Housing
Coordinator. Okay. All right, moved in second. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. 5-0, Joe.
Thank you.
Discussion and possible vote, request for proposal for a title examiner. Joe?
I don't have anything specific to present this evening. Still working on that one. It was one of the items that fell to the wayside last week with the issues we were working on.
We'll bring it back next week.
Thank you.
The goal on this is to go out for bid to get our title examiner to work for the town of Harwich so we can start cleaning up all of these owners unknown and miscellaneous parcels.
This is
As
also
we've discussed.
long overdue.
Yes.
Yeah.
So that is coming back.
Can I just jump in on that?
Yes, you can.
I'm all for that, and I know we're bringing that back, but before any other RFPs go out, can we finish Brooks Park lighting?
We're close.
That's 18, and they got extra money in 21, and they're in fear of having to come back to ask for more money if we don't put that one out.
We'll let Joe give you a very brief update, but we are close.
Okay,
Administration shares that fear.
okay,
However, my understanding in meeting with the assistant administrator last week, the electrical engineer is working with both staff and administration to finalize the RFP to get it out.
okay, thank you.
We feel that the original schedule that we were working on, when I say we, I mean, when we had our town engineer and our assistant administrator working over the summertime, that we are on track for that Brooks Park lighting project, is my understanding.
Okay,
All right, so that one's coming back. Mary, I'll put that one on for an update. Okay. Discussion and possible vote to establish town administrator goals and objectives for fiscal year 2022 and complete evaluation form. So in your packet tonight, and we don't have to discuss this long, we can bring this back, but back in August, I started working on this, put together a little memo, and then 4 goals. Rather than do broad goals, I did discuss this with Joe. I think one of our most important goals is to finish everything that we've started. So there's a whole laundry list of projects that we know about and some that we probably don't know about. So there was 5 action items under outstanding goals. Then there was the comprehensive wastewater management, financial stability, and budgeting. So there's really not a lot of action items there. I did put primary responsible party and other key stakeholders in that. That really is up to the town administrator, not me. That was just a suggestion and for board conversation. With that, Joe, do you have any comments before I send it? Oh, and the last goal, the 5th, was housing and community development. Joe, do you have any comments?
First, just to say, as we learned this evening from council, that private parties, the board, and other parties can engage in contracts. We have one together, and it required both parties to get my goals done by the end of September. I want to make it clear that I offered to the chair, and he accepted on your behalf, that both parties are willing to extend that conversation, and that's where we are tonight, because parties can do that in a private contract. For me, I like the simplicity of the goals themselves, and it does dovetail to what I'm working on with my direct reports, and that is the evaluation form you see. So for me, I've built it off of my understanding of what a department head is, or a manager, a subject matter expert in that area of expertise, some other key components like budget, personnel, and those items. I think those are similar for me, and then what we're talking about here from the board are those specific goals that the board would assign to me. And then with regard to other key stakeholders, it helps me. I've already told staff that as my goals are created by the board, that the only way this works is if I cascade portions of my goal to my direct reports and them onto theirs, and so that the goals cascade downward from the board and roll back up, and that we're all held accountable to it. And so I like the simplicity of what's being offered this evening and the ability to bring other parties in on it, whereby I would obviously be in every instance overseeing it, but I would also be relying upon the abilities and expertise of my direct reports and their direct reports. And I think that's how we get things done.
Comments? Don?
Yeah, I agree with what Joe said, and this finally gets us to a point where we recognize, I think we've been talking about this for about 4 years now, that the goals and objectives really do need to be aligned with the job description. A number of us have held jobs outside of government, and how well you do your job is exactly how you get rated in most places. So creating a set of completely separate set of goals and objectives which are detached from the job description is kind of insane. You really want somebody that's doing their job well as articulated in their job description, and this kind of gets you there, along with the add-on specific goals for the year that the Board of Selectmen may pick. So I'm supportive of this approach.
Mary?
I like what's there. The only thing that I didn't see there was, and this is very fine font, so maybe it's my eyes, personnel management, because certainly you got plenty of that going. you know, with a large operation, shouldn't that be one of the goals?
Part 3.
What's that?
Part 3.
It's in there?
Mr. Chairman, if I may?
Go ahead.
Not to speak for the chairman and the goals he's presented, but I think we've covered that in the form itself. So if you look at the evaluation form, as I do with my direct reports, first there's a subject matter expertise. That is something that the board would have to, you know, define for me, if you will. But then you have Part 2, budget development, Part 3, personnel management.
Okay.
Part 4, procurement management, Part 5, providing leadership, and then 6A and 6B. So 6B is specific goals. So to me, whatever you don't see in this general evaluation form, you would add under item 6B. So for me, it's not that personnel is missing, it's already embedded in the overall day-to-day things that I would need to be held accountable for.
Okay. I would just feel better if I saw it also up there in the objectives.
My only thought with that, Mary, is it's really, that's his job.
Yeah, it's over all of them.
So if he doesn't manage the personnel well, we fire him. So I don't know how we could add that
Not to put too
and
fine
not
a
get
point on
involved
it.
in day-to-day business. So we're not supposed to jump into day-to-day business. So I didn't see how I could add that
Okay,
and not step on Joe's position.
I'm fine if you guys are.
Julie?
Well, on that note, I would say that I've always been in favor of, and not to anybody's denigration, just to have a separate person allotted to personnel, but we talked about that when I was on the board. I'm delighted to see a streamlined form that focuses on a couple things, because when I was on the board, the previous one was not the greatest, so I think it's great that there's been progress made.
Thank you. Larry?
Yeah, I agree. We've talked for a long time about being sure we have a simple and clear objective, so this is a real fine point. But on the comprehensive wastewater, the first point where we have complete comprehensive wastewater plan. We have a complete wastewater plan now. It's been approved by DEP, county, EPA. And what our mission now is to update the plan, as you know, because then we have to go through MEPA to get it approved and stuff. So I just substitute update or revise, just make that technically correct. It's on comprehensive
Update.
wastewater,
Okay.
the first
Yeah.
point.
Comp wastewater update. All right.
Otherwise, we'll kind of go against our own, where we are.
All right. Do we want to put this behind us and vote it now?
I do.
Motion?
I move we approve the goals and the, want to do the other one too, the evaluation form
Sure.
as presented tonight.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion? Don?
Yeah, my only concern with approving that tonight is, are all things equal in worth? I mean, with that, we've got a whole bunch of things here that are goals and objectives. They're all equal? I mean, they're all worth the same point values? I mean, I'm really much more in favor of certain things being deal killers. If you can't perform this function, it doesn't matter how much else you do, you're not going to succeed. You know, weighting factors?
I know what you're talking about. I guess I take your point. I like to give a goal of simplifying it myself. And
I guess, Don, my only comment on that was, to Julie's point, and she wasn't part of last year's process, the evaluation forms were awful. And I can remember that we went before, and last year's was better than the one that we used under the past town administrator, but I can remember certain members given a 40 and another member given a 98, and that was with a weighted system. So for me, I thought individual comments, satisfactory, unsatisfactory, which ultimately comes down to pass and fail, to me is a lot easier to navigate than that process that we all got.
But that's going to be the process, though. Pass, fail with an aggregate.
I like pass, fail. I don't,
Okay.
If pass gets him his contractual increase, fail does not. And if Joe's okay with it, I just don't see, I really don't see the weighting thing working.
No, it wasn't
It's
apparent to
never
me when
worked.
reading this that that's what you were going to, that's what you were doing. But if that's what the deal is, if you got 26 goals and objectives and 14 of them are acceptable, then that's a pass.
Yeah, and I see it no different than our votes here tonight, 5-0 vote. So if he's got 3 pass and 2 fail, he passes. That's the simplistic way for me, but Joe?
So I'm going to try and detach myself from my body and speak objectively as your personnel administrator. But to the form itself, the intent of that form, so that is a form that I'm using for my direct reports. And the purpose of that, excuse me, is twofold at the least. First is to establish annual reviews. And I know that that's something that we as an organization and a culture haven't been doing regularly. So it's meant to be an annual evaluative process. And so put aside a contract for a moment. What this gets to is it's the mechanism by which an employee is judged. Are you doing satisfactory work, and should you obtain a standard cost of living adjustment? And so, you know, for me, it's a cost of living adjustment. For department heads under collective bargaining, it's a step increase. Some employees that have gone far enough, it's a longevity increase. So the question is, has the employee, and I really do mean to take that pronoun out a moment ago, has the employee been operating in accordance with these objectives and goals satisfactorily? Because then if you look at the last page, then in the short term, the answer is yes. Then what happens? They've achieved their step increase. They may have achieved a cost of living. Now to bring it back to me specifically, because I wanted the form to match, because the form has to match for my purposes to do the cascading of goals and all that. But I would ask you to remember our agreement, if you will. So first, and I've said it to some of you already, but technically I'm the new guy, said the guy who's been here for almost 2.5 years. That is to say, I'm operating under a contract that was executed February 1st of this year. And in that contract, it requires us to develop goals by the end of September. We're on track to do that. But then it requires you folks to do at least 2 evaluations of me. One, 3 months after the goals have been created, and then 3 months after that. And so the way it times out is if we say we met the September 30 goal, by the end of this calendar year, you want to do a review of me. Or I would say there's maybe an obligation to do a review if the parties understand that's the language in the contract. And then you have a second review, and that would end by the end of March 31st. And what I've taken from that is that could inform you folks for decision-making for the next fiscal year, because that would be 3 months later. So it's meant to be multi-purpose. First of all, it's a way to keep score, for lack of a better word, and then have a conclusion. So theoretically, under my contract with a 3-year contract, you'd be doing evaluations, it says, in the first year for 3 months after the goals and 3 months after that. And then I believe the language talks about in the successor years, you do evaluations on an annual basis. And so then the contract talks about in that magical end of second coming into third year, you have some decision-making to do. You have obligations to talk to me 6 months before my contract is due. So for me, this form can work in the short term. Is the person doing an adequate job, and do they deserve a standard increase? And then in the future, have they been doing a successful job, and do they deserve retention? So it's really meant to capture all of that, because the same can be used for other employees.
Are we good?
And now I'm going to re-enter my, I'm back here.
Follow up, Mary?
I just like the simplicity of the form. It's 3 check boxes, and then if there's anything particularly noteworthy, you've got a place for comments.
Yeah, I think criticism
think
is a good
it's-
thing, and praise, but I think when board members, and I know in the past, they have not always been very friendly. And unfortunately, this is the process that we have, is the public process where we have to criticize in public. So I think the board members, the narrative is extremely important. We did, years ago, had a selectman that gave someone a 98 with absolutely no narrative. I mean, we have to have the conversation, and if we're not gonna have a conversation, we should have a narrative, because our administrator should know where he needs to pick it up, what he's doing well on and what he's not doing well on. Don?
Yeah, I might add, least in the federal government, if you did anything other than average, you had to explain it, both above and below. I mean, the only way you could get a pass from doing an extensive narrative is you're adequate. But anything below adequate or above to exceptional required you to put a narrative in to justify why that was.
Well, not that I would want to complicate anything any further, but I will say that, you know, this evaluation form in terms of analyzing Joe is one thing, but we don't get much feedback from Joe on things that could be improved board-wise, because we're not asking those questions, but that's probably opening a can of worms.
And it's 9:30.
Yeah, so I'll just say.
Put my mask on.
So I'm gonna go, we'll go all in favor?
Aye.
Aye, 5-0, Joe. And the only extra comment, and given the hour, we won't get into it, but Joe and I have had lengthy conversations, and there's things in here about rating him on his management abilities, and the fact that the board can't talk to any department heads. So that's something that I think we need to talk about further as a board, and whether or not we can quiz department heads or whatever, but to get some sort of sense from employees. And then to further that, with our 3 other direct hires, the way that the process has always worked is the evaluations have been done by the administrator with very little input from the board. And I think the board should be able to talk to one of those 3 hires, our direct hires, and be part of the evaluation personally. But I think that's a board decision, and I have asked for a legal opinion on whether we can or cannot, just so that we have that if we make that decision. All right, moving on to H. This is just a vote to approve the Green Communities Competitive Grant Program
I move we
application.
approve the Green Communities Competitive Grant
Application?
application.
Moved and seconded. Any questions? All in favor? Aye. 5-0, Joe.
And I believe there is the signature going around, and I believe the chair would be the one signing for that one.
Last on the agenda is discussion and possible vote, approve special counsel to Harwich Affordable Housing Trust. Don, there's an email in the packet from Don that I'm sure you all read, and I will turn this over to Don now for opening statements.
Yeah, especially for even though Julie was here before, this is still a newish issue. We did ask the Board of Selectmen to appoint special counsel for all matters pertaining to the acquisition of the Marsline property. And Larry Brophy actually came up with somebody through his contacts, old contacts with the BRA. We used Robinson and Cole. And a particular lawyer there was nimble. He responded quickly to everything. I don't think we could have gotten this done in the time frame. Well, Julie would know. I mean, a commercial piece of property in 5 months from beginning of talking about it to closing on it. He was extraordinarily good, and he devoted himself fully to whatever issues we wanted to, and we were urging the board to continue that relationship for other things, because there's going to be possibilities of flipping properties and other things that are pretty technical, that we would really need somebody who is that devoted to just this.
So this was a request that came out of a vote taken by the Affordable Housing Trust, and the Board of Selectmen has to vote to appoint this.
Yeah, with that, Mike, I move that we approve the special counsel to the Harwich Affordable Housing Trust.
Second.
Okay, moved and seconded, discussion. The only discussion I have, and the only place this sticks for me, is it says, with the trust on all future matters. What I'm not interested in doing is hiring special counsel to fight town council on matters pertaining to trust documents or anything else. If it's related to land acquisition, land sales, and land deals, I have absolutely no problem with it, but I'm not gonna set the town up to fight with itself. And I don't think that's a responsible thing to do.
No, so maybe we revise the motion.
No, just open it up, that's just my thoughts, so I would open it up for conversation, and maybe, we got 2 trust members here tonight. Joe hasn't spoken yet.
Yeah,
Maybe
that was-
Joe, what do you think of this request, Joe?
I think you need to explain it better, because I read that. I mean, I have to agree with what you said, certainly, but I didn't read it differently in what the memo that Don sent seemed that was directed only towards the housing trust.
It is directed only to the Housing Trust, but what I don't want to see is a conflict, and there's one now. We've had open conversation about it, about what the trust documents say on who the chair may be. That's not going to be for this council to argue with our council, and that should be something that the trust votes on, and I believe it's a unanimous vote of the trust to change the trust documents, and then a vote of the Board of Selectmen after that. So it will have already been argued with the trust members when it comes to us anyway. Why involve another lawyer that would then argue language with town council? That's my opinion.
But I thought, when I read the email from Dawn, and the specific reference to the Marceline property, and also to say that, and we would expect no less as the need for council arises, as it most certainly will, as we move forward with the development plans for that project, potential future acquisitions and disposals. So I thought that this person, he or she, would be directed for that purpose. To your point, I wouldn't want that either. We don't need more litigation.
I'm only trying to clarify.
So.
Before I go to Don, Joe.
Well, I have no problem changing the motion and say.
But hang on
only
one
with the
second,
Marceline
let's just hear, we
policy.
might not have to, but Joe?
I interpreted the way the members have just stated it. I didn't see this as anything other than supporting the trust and their ongoing responsibilities to support affordable housing.
Don?
That's how I viewed it. I mean, the other discussion is a wholly separate discussion, because I fended off even a discussion at the trust level, because somebody has to take a look at that document that got filed. There's some inconsistencies in it, and I don't care who that is.
We all agree on that.
Somebody would have to do that to make it consistent with the bylaw that was passed. But beyond that, this was only contemplated that we need your approval to be able to pick up the phone and say, we still have you as counsel, we've got this piece of property, we'd like to sell it, or what do we have to go through to do that?
So with that, Joe, you don't see any reason to change the motion?
Correct.
Okay.
No, I thought the motion
Any further
was
discussion?
made.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye, 5-0. Town administrators report.
None.
Selectmen's report. Larry.
None.
Julie.
Which is on the water, fantastic event this past weekend. We raised at this moment over $18,000 for the family pantry.
Oh,
Thank you to
fantastic.
North Chatham Outfitters for a donation of a stand-up paddleboard for our raffle, which raised a lot of money. I don't have the defined amount yet, but it was a great event. Watching a bunch of people paddle dressed up as witches.
I only got to attend for a few minutes, and the wind looked scary, so I left before the event started. Mary?
Just a couple of things real quick. I met with the Housing Committee, I think it was last week, just a few days ago. They feel to really get going, what we need is a joint meeting, the Affordable Trust and the Housing Committee, all in a room together. So can I give that to you, Mr. Chairman, to get a
Already given.
joint
Understood.
meeting? Okay, great. The other thing is, Julie and I attended and Joe, the fire chief's ceremony on Friday. I don't do well at 9:45. He did a fabulous job recognizing those individuals, and I just wondered if we couldn't send a letter from the selectmen. There was a new provisional firefighter. I've lost his name here in this form. Steve Imparato.
Yeah, I think that
And
was-
then two firefighters, Matt Eldridge and Farrow, got years of service pins. Two were recognized for their probation, and then firefighter Ford, for his actions on Route 6. So I'd like a letter from the selectmen to
Absolutely.
congratulate them. And that's it for me.
Thank you. Don?
Next year, hit them up for a boat. That's it.
Oh, that is a boat. Motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor? Aye. 5-0.